the people scoff like that? Seems we don't want the truth anymore. Even though we see the grave, we throw aside and foolishly buy into lies. Why don't the leaders fear the Lord? Seems they are not ashamed what they do. They willingly mislead and sow discord. And you actually believe that they're for you. Republicans and Democrats won't save you. Gotta understand that they're depraved to carry out a plan that will enslave you and set you against the one who made you. Influencers and celebrities don't really know much, and they actually won't stand for God if revenue just ceases. I'm just here to help connect the pieces.
If foundations crumble, what will the righteous do? I remember the God enthroned in heaven still rules. Examine me, Lord, and count me among your tribe. Continue to light my way. I just wanna see your face. I trust in the Lord, so into the mountains I will not flee. I will not be struck by the weapons they fashion for me. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. I will not conform to the spirit of this age. For this I know we will all get our wish. But thank you, O Lord, for the sacrifice you made. Use me to go forth and proclaim your name. The wicked ways of the evil won't last. Be with your remnant and order our path. Although things seem so dim, this hour will pass. We long for your coming, so come soon we ask. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay.
I'm not sure about everybody else, but for me it's still in God we trust. Yeah, sure, I'm well aware of the influx of the hot air blowing like air ducts. But tell me, do you really wanna know the source? Black power, but is it really black? Of course not, but they lead the culture and they lead the trends. Got you demoralizing, you don't know which end is up or down. I don't subscribe to the type of vibes that society say it ought to be. If I'm a black man and young, I'd rather be a good example to my sons. I don't get caught up in who's racist, so not to waste time worrying about that is just dumb. I just put my foot to the pedal, nothing special about me except I put my faith in the sun. Yeah, Lord God, forgive us, for we do not know where this culture will lead us. This generation and its legislation for a pagan nation is abomination to the Lord. Raise up young people who will wield the sword. Turn boys into fathers, let daughters adore. Let mothers of virtue equip them with the armor of God as we prepare for war. No, I cannot see you, you're not in my way. I won't let you muffle what I have to say, yeah. Cancel me, defame and slander my name, and call me a coon or pick me a lame. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise.
I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise. I wish you well and pray for the day that you see the error in all of your ways. Repent of your sin and fall on your face, and choose this day to give God His praise.
In 1951, Joe McCarthy became the chairman.
He has become perhaps the most powerful man in the Senate, the most controversial figure in America.
And this committee's activities may well determine whether this nation will live or die.
He was able to expose the infiltration of real communists into the most powerful government in the world.
You had an entire cadre: J. Robert Oppenheimer, Klaus Fuchs, Alger Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Lachlan Curry. These men were undoubtedly discovered to have been either members of the Communist Party or Soviet sympathizers who, in fact, sent secret information directly to the Soviet Union.
Senator McCarthy had a list of communist infiltrators, which included high-ranking figures in the U.S. Army. Joseph Welch operated as chief counsel for the U.S. Army and represented the institution during the Senate hearings.
Joseph Welch, defense attorney for the Army, a shrewd trial lawyer from Boston.
As it turns out, Welch himself had communist sympathizers working within his very own law firm, including one Fred Fisher.
He has in his law firm a young man named Fisher, who has been for a number of years a member of an organization which was named, years and years ago, as the legal bulwark of the Communist Party.
When McCarthy asked about Fisher during the hearings, Welch, who figured these questions would eventually come, gave an emotional response, which was meant to flip everything onto McCarthy. making McCarthy look like the villain.
It is, I regret to say, equally true that I fear he shall always bear a scar needlessly inflicted by you. Let us not assassinate this lad further, Senator. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?
Allies of Welch would later admit that his emotional response wasn't genuine, but in fact a performance.
Joe Welch literally has a tear in his eye. This was seen as spontaneous. In fact, Welch had been thinking of this for months. Jim St. Clair, who was second in command to Joe Welch, said, "We walked out the side door. The door closed behind us. He winked at me and said, 'How did I do?' And they said, 'Great, you did great.'"
The whole purpose was to win in the court of public opinion, making not communism look like the threat to America, but McCarthy himself.
There are those who feel that they should censure me, not because I cross-examined Zwicker trying to find out.
In the long run, cowardice Republicans in Congress succumbed to pressure and influence by the federal government and the media to censor and discredit McCarthy.
They base their vote upon political reasons when they say ahead of time, in effect, regardless of what the evidence says, this man has been fighting communism, therefore we're going to get him.
Well, now, Senator,
I think a lynching bee is a good name for it, Bill.
And now today,
you remember the House Un-American Activities Committee chaired by Senator Joe McCarthy during the 1950s, right?
I really pick up the story with McCarthy.
moronic historians, media pundits, and educators who don't know any better slander his name.
We can't let McCarthyism win.
Joe McCarthy was running sham investigations in his committee and pushing completely fake accusations against innocent people and lying about.
What is tragic to me is that we remember the name Joe McCarthy from that era more so than we do actual communist infiltration that happened. An honest appraisal of the facts of the historical record will show that Joe McCarthy was right.
Hello and welcome everyone to this live stream with myself and Chuck Littleton from the cast of the MLK Project. We're streaming on a Saturday night, so I don't suspect that we will get a ton of folks, but for those of you who are here, welcome. For those of you who are watching the replay, welcome. We were supposed to do this live stream last night, but some things came up, so we're here tonight. And we wanted to expound upon the whole McCarthy era situation. And personally, I think that the McCarthy era, which I kind of cringe using that language, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that whole saga deserves a documentary in itself. But for what we have right now in terms of episode 5 of the MLK Project going into what happened with the whole McCarthy saga, and with this episode between this stream, I should say, between myself and Chuck, my hope is that we try to do our due in terms of clearing the name of McCarthy. I know that this one live stream isn't going to do it. I know that one episode in the MLK Project isn't going to do it, but the very least we can do is to get people talking, because of the fact that what we're seeing right now has been the writing on the wall for a very long time. And over the course of the 1950s and 60s, you had men, brave men, bold men, who were trying to call it out and trying to say what's going on here, what's at play, is nefarious, is communistic in nature. And they were trying to draw attention to it. And to the extent that they tried to do that, they were vilified by the press. They were vilified by the centralized media. And that same media went out of their way to place up on a pedestal people who were either communists themselves, people who were communist sympathizers, or in some direct or indirect way were influenced by communists. And that's not to make communism out to be the big bad boogeyman that if we get rid of communism, then we're all living in peace and perfection, because there's always going to be ideological weapons out there, if you will. But communism, to the point of that my friend Chuck Littleton makes often, is a story of the 20th century, and it just so happens to be one of the biggest ideological threats that we were faced with over the course of the 20th century. And so the reality of it is the press was able to help in getting people like Martin King into the good graces of the American people, making him appear to be larger than life. They were able to basically assist in helping shape public opinion as it relates to not only King and the civil rights movement, but social justice and social activism in general, such to where most people, be they on the right or the left, believe that like what we have in terms of a lot of the policies and bills that came out of that kind of civil rights era is how you get progress in America. Never mind the fact that legitimate rights that are endowed by God himself, as acknowledged in our Declaration of Independence, are being undermined in the name of freedom and safety and democracy, right? So we are helping to usher in tyranny by way of statism. And I know I'm throwing a lot of words out there, but the reality of it is we were like, they pulled a fast one on us, and here along the way you had people like McCarthy who were trying to warn us against what was actually going on, and the fact that he was made to be the villain and the real villains were made to be the heroes with the help of the press is something that needs to be corrected. That's something that we need to, at the very least, draw attention to. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and add my good friend Chuck Littleton to the stage. How are you, Chuck?
What's up, man? Had to rush home. I know, like you told the audience, we had to reschedule a couple of times. And I said, okay, let me run to the gym real quick, get a quick workout in. I got some time. And you had texted me and said you could be ready in 30 minutes. And I was actually in my car on my way home. So almost like right on time, on cue, the moment I walked through the doors when you sent the StreamYard link to me. So I just went ahead and hopped on the computer. I got my gym hoodie on. I'm sweaty and stinking, and it's all good, man. I'm ready to go. Grab me a little smoothie on the way home. This is my dinner tonight, so I'm ready to go, man. It's a bit of a step back from your last show with Vince. No suits tonight, so you guys are cool with that. If Vince watches this live stream, I just want to say that I do own a few suits. Vince, I clean up a little bit, so I can't hang with Vince, but I clean up a little bit. But tonight we gonna dumb it down and hopefully you all pay attention to the words that are coming out of my mouth and not how dusty and dingy I look. But anyway, feeling good, man. Ready to have this conversation, as you stated. McCarthy, the era of quote unquote McCarthyism, like you said, it deserves a documentary of its own. That's why I'm glad to do this live stream so that we can expound upon McCarthy in that era some more. I mean, like you made, it's bigger than McCarthy himself, and hopefully we'll touch on some of those topics and touch some of those issues tonight. So looking forward to it. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, when we look at the fact that we're literally voting, they call themselves democratic socialists, but really they're communists. And I say that not hyperbolically. I say that because if you study what democratic socialism is,
right,
you begin to see the different categories and the different movements. Like they don't really mean much in terms of factions being ideologically opposed to each other. In fact, they all work alongside each other in very direct and indirect ways, clandestinely, explicitly, depending on what the issue is. And not only that, I mean, people who try to make a distinction between socialism and communism, or democratic socialism and communism, or Bernie Sanders famously said that there's a difference, but there's a huge difference in the Saturday Night Live skit that he did with Larry David. There's a huge difference between socialism and democratic socialism. There really isn't. There really is not. And the fact is, all one must do is ask themselves, let's say the democratic socialist, which is marketed to be this kind of hybrid between capitalism and communism. That's how it's marketed. We want for people to keep their private property. We want to keep certain things a certain way. We just believe that socialism shouldn't be ruled out. It should be voted on by way of democracy. Like they make these it's kind of like snowflake socialism, communism, socialism light. That's the way that they market it. But the reality of it is, all one must do to determine whether there really is any distinguishable difference between these ideologies and these worldviews is to say, let's say that we get ourselves a democratic socialist president, several democratic socialist senators, so on and so forth, and they manage to get a lot of policies passed. After they've gotten their policies passed, do they stop there? And do they stop the communists from creeping in and trying to push it further? Or do they stand on the principles of their ideology and say, do they stand on the principles of their ideology and say, no, we're going to stop it there because that's not the democratic way? Like, no, they're going to roll out the red carpet. They're going to allow it to go further and further and further and further. And so it's not as if they are ideologically beholden to this thing, democratic socialism, and they don't want to take it any further than that. No, all it is tactics, marketing, branding. That's all it is, trying to get and poach each corner of the society, as it were. Communism might sound good to these people over here on this campus at Berkeley. Democratic socialism might sound better for these people over here in working class Pittsburgh. You know what I mean? So it's all about strategy more than it is any kind of principled fidelity to ideology. I'm hoping that makes sense. You care to expound on that at all?
No. I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's just rhetoric. It sounds a little bit sweeter. You hear the term socialism and people are taken aback by that term. But when you qualify it with democratic, it gives you this sense that it's somehow this evolved way of looking at how we sort of developed our model of representative government, accountable government. It's like, well, we can have socialism, but at the same time, it's democratic. So there's, it will still be a society where people are relatively free. But it doesn't work that way, especially when the government has the right and the ability, whether we hand it over or not. See, therein lies the problem, as you just mentioned. Once we hand it over, we never get it back, and that's what acts as a check on government. In fact, is the private sector and all the things that come along with that, and how we're able to exercise free will, vis-a-vis freedom of association and all of these things. Socialism doesn't allow you to do that. And so you don't have freedom in such a society where the government can not just pick winners and losers, but I mean, when you're talking about things, for example, like, one of these hot button topics, political topics, like what they call health care, but what they really mean is health insurance. But again, this is another way that they play on words. If the government is in control of who gets medical services, then the government has effectively, I mean, they own the right, or have the ability to literally determine who lives and dies. And so it's a lot there. And Chad, I would also, when you mentioned like terms like or democratic socialism, communism, when you look back and you go back all of the prominent Marxist theoreticians from the mid 1800s all the way up to the early 20th century, they love to use the term democratic. And, that was a part of their whole popular front facade to try to make, communism seem like it was this popular thing. And so why not? Why can't we have it? We should have it because this is what everyone wants. You see, this is what democracy sort of, this is what it looks like. And again, by that time, terms such as communism and socialism became sort of interchangeable. But then again, you'll have a lot of these left-wing or leftists, quite frankly, theoreticians that try to muddy the water so that these concepts kind of goes over the head of the laity. But it's really not that complicated. And I would also add, when you're talking democratic socialism or communism, I would also add Nazism to that bag as well, because there's very little, if any, difference between Nazism and communism either. And it plays into the conversation that we're going to have tonight when talking about subversive activities in the United States, because it wasn't simply exclusive to communists. But a lot of people don't know that. You muted, Chad.
Yeah, this is a conversation that we're actually gonna have to break up into several parts because we're not going to be able to squeeze it all into tonight. But it's interesting because the whole slogan of "This is what democracy looks like," which is what a lot of communists use when they go on their little marches and things. To your point, for well over 100 years, they've been fighting. I mean, if you look at women's suffrage in the 1920s, the whole idea of give the woman the ballot, votes for women. When you look at that, I mean, the whole idea and the whole concept was mass enfranchisement. They've always been trying to expand what they perceive to be a democracy. Of course, you and I have both beaten this drum of America not being a democracy; it's a constitutional republic. However, a lot of Americans believe that we are in fact a democracy, that our way of voting is democratic. And so, they're trying to push for one person, one vote. They're trying to push for mass enfranchisement. They're trying to lower the voting age, make it to where illegals and incarcerated people can vote. We all know what's going on. And this, when you look at mass enfranchisement, talk a little bit about what's actually going on too, simultaneously to that. And what I mean by that is it's not as if they just think that the ball should be tossed up to the people and they should decide based upon whatever their worldview is, whatever their ideology is, but rather, while they're talking about mass enfranchisement, they're also shifting the cultural hegemony. So the idea is like, it's kind of sinister in a way, isn't it? Because on the one hand, they're shaping public opinion, and on the other hand, they are saying we should lean into consensus and public opinion to determine which way society should go, if that question makes sense.
No, you're right. I mean, that's exactly what they're doing. Friedrich Engels himself would say this in the, I don't know the exact year, but it was sometime during the late 19th century. He was quite impressed. He was excited about the future because of these suffrage ideas, these universal suffrage movements. A lot of people forget or I forget, because no one was alive that's alive today was alive back then, I don't think. Back in France during the late 1700s, you had something called universal male suffrage. And not just France, but in England, you had a lot of activist types were floating these ideas around. For example, things like granting women the right to vote and extending voting rights to certain men within the society who did not have the right to vote, because not all men could vote either. across these, various Western nation states. And then by the time, Marx and Engels would connect and they would begin to write, Engels would say that he looked forward to the future and he was impressed by this push for mass enfranchisement. So that way, he said, and I'm going to paraphrase him, that we wouldn't need to take over the world by a violent a revolution. We could do it politically, because the more people vote, this idea that of course the way they view economic relationships, and they have this theory of conflict. And I don't want to get too philosophic and start breaking all of that stuff down, but of course you have in their minds more have-nots than you do haves, and so therefore their political power will outweigh the political power, the political influence of the few. And so therefore when the workers or the proletariat are able to get their way through the political process, we can then, according to Engels, these are his words, create a proletarian constitution, is what he called it. So yeah, this is what mass enfranchisement. This is what it does. And I don't know if you want to get into the particular details or reasons why it works itself out that way. The more and more people you kind of let in, why it pollutes, it dilutes the process. It's a very interesting topic, and I don't know if that's something that you want to explore. That may be a separate conversation, but at the end of the day, the fact.
I'll tell you what I'll do. So we are so we're going to be ending season 1 of the MLK Project early December, late November, early December. And between that time and the start of season 2, we're going to have some downtime, but I'm still going to be pushing out content. I'm going to be doing book reviews of a lot of the books and materials that we actually used for the research for season 1. But I also want to have these kinds of conversations with you. So you and I need to talk offline about what your availability is and all that good stuff is, because a lot of those details, I don't think we can just like touch on for like maybe 2 or 3 minutes and then move on to the next thing. Like I think it requires its due in terms of really laying things out, really kind of building the backdrop, building the foundation, and really kind of blowing it home, or taking it home. So let's put a pin in that for now. But so when we look at some of the self-admitted democratic socialists who are in fact communists who are being elected to office today, I mean, you just had the election of Zoran Mamdani, you had the election of AOC in 2018, I believe. There's another woman in New York, although I think she's a state senator or something like that. I've noticed though that these are all kind of focused on New York. So while it is national news and everybody is saying the sky is falling, the reality is it's hyper focused in New York. And so I want you to kind of speak to two things. One, I want you to talk about like how, like whether what we're seeing in the way of people like Mamdani and others, like whether that's a surprise in light of the kind of things that McCarthy was warning about. And then also want you to speak of like why New York, like what's been going on in New York for the past 100 or so years.
Am I surprised? I don't know, especially like you said, in light of what McCarthy was warning us about, and we'll move more into McCarthy specifically shortly here. But I'm still mulling it over in my mind. I don't quite know how to think about it and how to explain what happened. I don't know if this is a blip on the screen, on the radar. I know a lot of people are saying, well, just let New York City have what New York City wants. and it will soon realize that this is not what they bargained for. And then, perhaps in the future, they'll make 180-degree turn. The way that our, country is set up, we try to mitigate the sort of, as far as like any consequences beyond the political confines of New York City, try to prevent it from spilling out into other parts of the country. But, when you have a lot of these counties and cities sort of, picking and choosing and nullifying certain federal statutes and so on and so forth, it does seem to have a deleterious effect on the entire nation. New York, though, is it's a very curious case because this is not the first time that New York has elected a a communist politician. I mean, I can't recall off the top of my head if there have been any Communist Party member to become mayor of the city of mayor of the city of New York. You muted, Chad, if you said something.
Yeah, there have been councilmen.
Yeah, but there have been. That's exactly. There have been Communist Party members, open Communist Party members, that were elected to public office in the state of New York. And this probably is true of some other states as well, but New York, most certainly. And when you ask the second question about what is specific about New York, New York is key in this. And you're talking about the history going back to the early 20th century, because that was a time of intense migration from particularly Europe, Southern Eastern Europe and whatnot. And you had a lot of different immigrant populations settling in New York City. And there's this kind of connection between a lot of these hardcore left-wing ideas and minority populations in any given society where they find themselves. This is why early, in the beginning, communism was kind of looked at by the majority of the society as this kind of weird, almost like a dirty or evil thing, because the majority of people who consider themselves to be communists were a lot of foreigners, and a lot of them didn't speak English and whatnot. And we're talking late 19th, early 20th century. But by the time you reach the 1920s is when these ideas began to gain respectability, because these ideas began to filter into our colleges and universities, particularly in the Ivy League and Columbia, Harvard, Yale, these places, but Columbia especially. But New York is key in this way, like I said, because it is the mecca, the initial point of arrival for many immigrants, and that was the case back then in the early 20th century. And so when the Communist Party began, of course, the official Communist Party, there were two of them, and they were forced to merge at the behest of Moscow. But this was right around the time, shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution. The first Communist Party was founded in the city of Chicago. But the overwhelming majority of card-carrying members of the Communist Party lived in New York, maybe somewhere between a third or half of them, according to Federal Bureau of Investigation statistics going back to like the 1940s. But that's like a brief way, without going into too much detail, the significance of New York City. It was just the home of many of European immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, we know that we have Bernie Sanders, who is the senator, or one of the senators there in Vermont, and he's been in elected office for a long period of time, for about 40 years now, thereabout. And he's up, of course, obviously in the upper East Coast. again, like these people tend to be more focused either on the East Coast, and maybe it's just a coastal states thing. I mean, with the exception of Florida, but I know down in California, you have a lot of the same the people who have the same opinions. I know the current mayor of LA has some socialist views, so I don't know what it is. I mean, about these coastal states, but I think you bring up a very good point when you look at the immigration or the demographic component to it. I guess that's one of those factors that I haven't really considered. I think I was more of the opinion that, I mean, you just have when you look at New Amsterdam, which later became New York, and it has for a long time been a very like the trading post for of this part of the world for all intents and purposes. Of course, you have a lot of things going on, a lot of things happening. You have a lot of increase in wealth, and as a result of this, you have the activists who come along and demand that wealth should be redistributed, and you have people who buy into that rhetoric and buy into that ideology. But I think that the point that you bring up about immigration is a really good point, because it helps to understand a lot of these things, especially whenever you consider the fact that a lot of the writers who have settled, who come from families that settled in New York, be they Italian writers, I know with like Bella Dodd, for example, or even some of the Eastern European writers who I've read, whose families settled in New York, they write about what they expected or what their families expected upon coming and arriving to America, and it not being what they expected it to be. So if you wanted to talk about that before we really get heavier into McCarthy.
It wasn't quite what they expected it to be, and many of them. What happens is, especially when it comes to the liberal arts, or what we call the soft sciences, it is very easy for someone, who's a part of the intellectual class or the creative class, who, these types of individuals have what I've described as a very, they have a high creative IQ. It is very easy for these individuals to play on group insecurity. And that's why I think minority populations in any given society are always the first domino to fall when it comes to embracing these ideas, because minority populations, and it's part and parcel of the human experience, and there's no easy fix. There's no easy way to do this. This happens all over the world. It's happened in the United States. It happened in India, where you saw intense tribalism, intense tribal fighting. We even mentioned this in the docuseries, Chad. We saw this in the Balkans. We see this in other places, because, to simplify it, in most societal contexts, most of the time, the quote unquote the demographic majority is going to be the group that makes the rules, right? And when you find yourself to be a minority surrounded by individuals who, you, for whatever reason, whether you're right or whether it's reality or whether it's just perception, you kind of see yourself as the other. And according to the old saying, right, when in Rome, do as, you have to sometimes assimilate in order to go along, right? Go along to get along. But there's always, in my extremely humble opinion, this kind of psychological push and pull, this tug of war that goes on in the mind of not just the individual, but in the collective of individuals who, in a sense, do get their sense of identity through their sense of community or their sense of belonging to their own unique group. Now, whether that be, you look at it from a racial point of view or a religious point of view, or whatever that may be. And so I think that in this need to assimilate to the wider culture that makes the rules, there's a deep sense of existential dread, because there's a sense that something, if that is to occur, there's this belief that something will be lost, something that is unique to who I am. And again, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't assimilate. It just simply means that it is a hard thing to do. And the problem is that in these types of situations where you do have this sort of group insecurity, this group, this sense of insecurity coming by way of a lot of, minority groups within these host societies, there's always, like you say, Chad, the passionate, charismatic, and the demagogue that can stress this idea and impress upon the people that they claim to lead, that you can circumvent the process of assimilation if you just follow behind me, so that you can get the things that you actually deserve. And the fact that they want you to be more like them is just them trying to oppress and da-da-da-da. We all know the talking points. We all know the language. And when that happens, you have a huge problem on your hands. Dr. Thomas Sowell, there's a ton of examples that he brings forth in his literature, and he talks about this, how those who specialize in the soft sciences always exploit and play on the minorities. And I think that has a lot to do with, again, the phenomenon of human beings and in our nature and how we relate to one another when it comes to group dynamics. It's a very tough thing, and it's not an easy fix. But Chad, the last point, and given the fact that here in the United States, because we have a relatively open and a relatively tolerant society, this is when these types of things can really occur and really intensify, when you have this idea of political openness and what have you. You may not see this kind of tribal violence and back and forth in a country, say, like Singapore, where they put that kind of stuff down. They punish it. It's not tolerated. But here it's like, well, give it a platform, let it speak, and
Right.
So that's the question. Do you want to tolerate it and bring it out into the open so we can debate it in the arena of public ideas, or right? Or do you want to put it down?
Yeah. Well, I know for me, I tend to. That's actually a really good question, and I've been thinking a lot about that question for a while now, as you well know. And what I always take it back to is exactly what John Adams said in 1797, which is that our Constitution was made for a moral and religious, and by religious, I think he means Christian people, and that it can't work for any other kind of people, because it's an exhibition of self-governance, and people who lack virtue, people who lack Christian ethics, in John Adams's opinion, as well as in my opinion, are incapable of self-governance. And so to the extent that we lose the virtue, the Christian ethic that our forefathers had, but we've inherited the vestiges of virtue, the vestiges and the freedoms that are in fact endowed by our creator. To the extent that we inherit their country but lack their values, we're like the children of wealthy parents who've inherited their money but didn't inherit the knowledge and the know-how to maintain and to keep it going, as it were. And so you kind of open up the doors and the floodgates to all manner of demagoguery and degeneracy, debauchery, ideological subversion, so on and so forth. And I think that's where we are now, where we're such a far cry away from what the Constitution and the edicts of the Constitution are. And we are, an ever expanding government, mass enfranchisement that is infringing and eroding away individual liberty and family, liberty and things of this nature, chiseling away at the idea of nation states, chiseling away at the idea of individual states in general. Typically, whenever you engage in any discussion of politics, and this happens all the time, you ask any person, and I invite people to put this to a test. Ask anybody about any kind of election, about politics, and 9 times out of 10, probably 10 times out of 10, their mind is going to go to the presidency. They're not going to talk about the local level. They're not going to talk about the city council. They're not going to talk about the local school board. They're not going to talk about even their state politics. They're always going to go directly to the top, the presidency. So we've been conditioned to believe that that's the only election that matters in a constitutional republic. So people are operating and functioning as if we do have a king. You know, this non-king, no king's protest was laughable, right? But they were actually making a confession more than they were an accusation. Like they believe, just like folks on the right believe, that that position is occupied for a kind of king, as it were, and that they should be able to move unilaterally. Republicans believe that their president should move unilaterally. Democrats believe that their president should be moved unilaterally. That their president should move unilaterally, and to the extent that the other side does it, this side has something to say about it, and vice versa. This pendulum is always swinging; it's always going back and forth, because that's where people's minds go. But anyway, I don't know how I got off on that little tangent. So did you have a comment on that before we take it back to McCarthy?
Nah, man. You're good, man. It's just you have multiple groups, man, from different different backgrounds. If you don't, the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights is our shared heritage, and that's what binds us. And I know, Chad. I mean, I don't. You talk about following Christ and people with this whole America First thing, and there's all this talk and debate about, well, what is Make America Great Again, or what does it mean to be America First, and all this other stuff, and and I hear that, and I'm like, hey, how about we just put God first? How about we, put, how about God first? You know what I mean? And then everything else to kind of take care of it. So I don't mean to, when I say the Constitution is our shared heritage, I know how you feel, and I know what your main goal and point of view is, all in all, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But just to take it a step down from there, the fact is that when you have different people from different backgrounds, the idea is that once we embrace the idea of Americanism, we are to put those things away. And the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence in our Bill of Rights, is meant to become our new shared identity, our new shared heritage. And unfortunately, that's not what is happening.
Yeah. I mean, and I think this kind of leads us to the whole McCarthy discussion. There's a lot of directions that my mind is going right now, and everything in my power is trying to tell me to stay on topic. But
you know how we do, man.
I am. But the fact of the matter is, we were given a constitutional republic and told to go govern yourself. And the reality of it is, people call it an experiment, the American experiment. And the big question is whether the experiment can work. And of course, Alexis de Tocqueville will come over here and say that it is working in so many words. He wrote several journals about it, which went on to be a book called Democracy in America.
Democracy in America, yeah.
Which, that title alone is interesting. But I get what he meant by the title, because you do have at least at the micro level democracy, which I say that, and there's a lot of people on the right who are like, no, we don't. Like, yeah, we actually kind of do.
Like that was the point.
Yeah.
Certain things are a more exemplary expression of the collective will, not anyway. So yeah, we do have you're right.
These things are complex, but anyway,
but people got to get on that high horse, man, and tell you how wrong you are and all that. It's just, man, what can you say?
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, so I guess where I'm going with that is, we were given a constitutional republic and told to go be self-governed, or go govern yourselves. And not only that, we put up guardrails, we put up restrictions, which limited the government and what it can and can't do and how far it can and can't reach. And then along came this ideology. And this ideology has been around for a while. We called it, but we would later call it Marxism. That was that from its very inception was not only antithetical but downright hostile to these guardrails that we put up here in the United States. And individuals, purveyors of that hostile ideology, got into our institutions, got into government here in the United States.
That's right.
And so the question became, how do we weed these people out of our government? And that became a huge debate. And when you look at the HUAC committee, when you look at a young Ronald Reagan in 1947, when asked, a rendition of this question was put to him, and we talked about this, I think, in one of the last Q&As. It may not have been with you, it may have been with someone else, but young, naive, impressionable, Ronald Reagan said, "I think democracy can do it. I think, if we just duke out these ideologies in the public square and open debate, people will see communism for what it is and reject it, and they will lean into the American way of life." That was what Ronald Reagan believed in 1947. But 15 years later, he was part of the narration of a documentary that actually exposed communist tactics and communist subversion. He was narrating for that documentary 15 years later. I would say the name, but it's not, I don't have it at the top of my head. I'm gonna have to probably share it with you all later. But he was able to figure out that this isn't something that you can just fight out in the open public square. This is something that you have to get more creative with how you weed it out, with how you identify it, with how you spot it. And so people like J. Edgar Hoover were on the front lines and weeding it out, identifying it. People like McCarthy were on the front line, and he wasn't the first one. We're going to talk a little bit here in a moment about Robert La Follette, who was the senator who McCarthy succeeded. But even he was a progressive, a self-admitted progressive, right? There's a lot of things that La Follette did that makes me think that he was probably a fellow traveler. But at the same time, I'm looking at this letter right now that I'm going to put up on the screen here in a moment after Chuck gets done giving his input, which, even La Follette was calling out communists. And he was the Bernie Sanders of his day there in the 1920s. So anyway, I know I said a lot. Go ahead and speak to any of that, Chuck.
Yeah. You said that there was Ronald Reagan was narrating a documentary later on. Ronald Reagan really got to see, like you said, how communists operate, thanks to his experience as the head of the Screen Actors Guild Union in Hollywood. At the time when he did testify before the HUAC committee, I don't believe he had held that position at that point. So again, this thing, I'm not trying to defend Ronald Reagan's stance or defend his position, but the fact of the matter is that for reasons, he was unaware of how communists operated, and a lot of people didn't, for that matter. You talked about the documentary. I don't know if you said it was a documentary. I know that Reagan, when his acting career began to kind of tail off, he did have a brief comeback in the entertainment industry as the host of a show called General Electric Theater, and it was sort of like a skit kind of like show. They did like different themes from week to week, and Ronald Reagan he used his platform as the host of General Electric Theater to actually put out anti-communist propaganda with that show. So it's very, very interesting. But anyway, like you said, as far as like with communist tactics, it's very unfortunate because you asked the question. You said, well, how do we weed these people out? See, this is why the warning and why we have a constitution that was to be adhered to by a moral people who understood the concept fidelity and honesty and integrity, because once we began to pull away and to violate the letter and the principle of the principles within those written words, it was almost no turning back. Once we let the floodgates open, and we let it. And so here's what I'm trying to say. And if you go to the 1930s, Chad, okay, and this is when the communist penetration really, this was the heyday of communist penetration in the 1930s during the years of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, because all of these so-called New Dealers, even if you go another book, this isn't some hidden gem. This is required reading. I would suggest for anyone who wants to understand communism, anyone who wants to understand the Cold War and all that stuff, you must go and read Whittaker Chambers' autobiography, Witness. You have to read that. Whittaker Chambers himself said that all the communists he knew, all of them were New Dealers. As a matter of fact, they used the New Deal as an excuse, because when FDR, when he created all of these institutions out of executive fiat, and the legislative branch just kind of gave the whole store to FDR, they were looking for individuals quick, fast, in a hurry to fill all of these new positions, because you had all of these new agencies that had never existed up until the post 1932. That's Franklin Delano Roosevelt's election. And you had all of these individuals flood into the federal government out of the Ivy League and other colleges and whatnot, across the country. And once we got them in, it was damn near impossible to get them out. And that's really, really where the problem began. When we began to increase the size of government, the only people who could fill these positions were the folks who specialize in theorizing, not the people who actually know how to make the society go, the people who actually go out and do things. They began to pluck all of these individuals from these colleges and universities. And these were the folks that were coming straight out of Columbia, right into the federal government. And many of them, untold numbers of them, were card-carrying members of the Communist Party or fellow travelers. And so that's why you should not go about the business, because again, Chad, the more and more you grow the federal largesse, the more and more these types of individuals are going to take up these roles and take up these positions, because they don't do anything else. They don't know how to do anything else. These are the people you want, or you would like them to find other ventures and avenues so as to make themselves useful to the society. But instead, that is the route they choose as policymakers. But more importantly, Chad, and this was key, and this is mentioned in the docuseries, because what ended up happening was, it wasn't so much that, okay, yes, we know what happened internally as far as America's domestic policy in the 1930s and the early 40s, but also it wasn't just simply espionage, meaning that a lot of American secrets were disseminated to the Soviets. It wasn't so much that, as much as it was communists were around they were in powerful positions themselves, but they were also around very powerful individuals who were responsible for making the kinds of decisions that would shape the world moving forward. It was about determining the United States its foreign policy position with respect to the Soviet Union and other soon to be communist superpowers like China. You know, we talk a lot, Chad, about the legacy of FDR and the short documentary you and I did together, sitting down, having a conversation on the administrative state. But another one of FDR's lasting legacies, I know that China didn't fall until 1949, but it is because not FDR him just by himself. And again, FDR is we'll probably talk more about him as well. But it was specifically the people around FDR. Had it not been for them, we wouldn't theoretically, or hypothetically, we wouldn't be dealing with China in the same way in which we're dealing with China today. This is the lasting legacy of what happened in the 1930s, almost 100 years later. China is a power in the world because of what FDR did when he opened up the floodgates back in the early 1930s. You muted, Chad.
Yeah, I can't find my AirPods anywhere. So every time you talk, I have to mute it so that people aren't getting an echo. But
Gotcha.
But neither here nor there. But yeah, I mean, we do. You're right. We do talk about. Well, we touch on it because it had so many ramifications. Him opening up the floodgates as it relates to the so-called civil rights movement, which people believe was infiltrated by the communists. Well, no, it was from its very inception, very nefariously influenced. Whether you're talking about foreign affairs or domestic affairs, there's a lot of negative ramifications, detrimental ramifications as it pertains to FDR opening up the floodgate. But naturally, because most of our historians today are ideologically driven, he's lauded as a hero who saved us from the Great Depression, which that to me, it's just so annoying when you consider just all of the historical narratives that are completely just wrong and ideologically driven as it relates to the feminist movement, civil rights movement, FDR administration, Obama administration, the McCarthy era, on and on I can go. So, I mean, that's why this is so important.
Yeah, and it's so unfortunate for the life and legacy of Joe McCarthy, because a lot of people think that, McCarthy was this, rogue, swashbuckling, hot-headed guy who just, came into the Senate. First of all, I think it bears mentioning to give a little background on McCarthy, because he was hated from the word go, and he was hated for a ton of reasons. First of all, McCarthy was, he was, of course, born in Wisconsin,
right?
So what'd you say?
Because of how he campaigned, right?
Not so much because of how he campaigned, but the fact that he unseated Robert LaFollette, and the LaFollettes were considered political royalty in the state of Wisconsin at the time. And when McCarthy won his Senate election in 1946, it was a massive upset. No one thought he could do it, and perhaps that is the reason why McCarthy was able to win in 1946, because the incumbent perhaps underestimated him. But no one thought McCarthy was going to win. At the time when McCarthy won the election in 1946, he entered the Senate at the age of 38. He was the youngest acting senator in the country. He was the youngest sitting senator in the country, and at the time, people have to remember from Calvin Coolidge being the last not Coolidge, I'm sorry, Hoover, Herbert Hoover was the last Republican president we had until, of course, FDR ran for the presidency 4 times and won all 4 times. But the Democrat Party, and I don't mean to make this a partisan issue, but I'm just speaking facts here, just to talk about McCarthy and why McCarthy has such a hard time. There are a lot of reasons, but you have to consider the fact that the Democrat Party dominated both the legislative and executive branches for nearly a 20-year stretch.
Right.
Yeah, so yeah, up until Eisenhower, and with the 52 election was the year that the Republicans gained the majority in the Senate. They held both chambers by 1952, but they ended up taking the House in 1946. But McCarthy was never a member of the House.
Right.
He came in from Wisconsin as a circuit judge. When he was a circuit judge in Wisconsin, he was the youngest jurist in the entire state. As a matter of fact, he ran for the judgeship whilst he was serving in the Marines during World War II, and he didn't even have to go.
Right.
He was exempted from the draft. May have been because of his age and other factors. No, it was because he was sitting on the bench. He was a judge, so he was exempt from service. He walked off he left his position as a circuit court judge. And I want to back up some more, because McCarthy, he didn't receive a high school diploma. He dropped out of school and went and started his own business, which was successful. He decided at the age of 20 that he wanted to go get a high school diploma or something equivalent. And he ended up enrolling in this program, Chad, where he earned his what was equivalent to a high school diploma or an actual high school diploma. I'm kind of missing on the details here, but he ended up achieving let's just say a high school diploma with some kind of special program he enrolled in within a matter of about 5 or 6 months. And so he crammed 4 years worth of education into some program that allowed him to earn his high school diploma. He enrolls at Marquette, gets his law degree, passes the bar, begins practicing law, which is key because this is why he was so good and effective in terms of making the case against communism once he became a senator. So he starts practicing law, right? Becomes a judge, and then goes off to fight in World War II. He runs I think he ran for the Senate in absentia while he was still away serving in the military. I think he ran for the Senate and he loses. He comes back, runs again, and that's when he finally wins in 1946. He goes from a circuit court judge to the Senate at just 38 years old. And so, again, he was the youngest at the time, and he was part of the minority party. So here you have this young junior senator coming in. At this time, there was an ideological split that would only grow wider within the Republican Party between sitting Republicans from the East Coast, that's that coastal thing again, Chad, and sitting Republicans who represented states positioned in the Midwest, and Republican senators from the West Coast at this time. Of course, famously, like California, famously the home state of Richard Nixon, and so on and so forth. And so you have this split within the Republican Party because the Republican elites were a lot of your, New York-based, Teddy Roosevelt type Republicans on the East Coast. And so they kind of looked down their nose at McCarthy because he was from the Midwest. He was young. He was of Irish descent, and he was a religious Catholic. And they thought that he was, just kind of ill-mannered. And I mean, they just looked down upon him. And they, as this junior senator, who is this guy to come in saying all these things and do, who is this guy? Because the reality is, Chad, and I'm gonna just go ahead and mention this because we talked about Martin Dies in the docuseries, because a lot of this information that McCarthy would begin to bring forth in 1950 was information that had already been discovered by the Republican Congress that assumed the majority, or the Republican House that had assumed the majority 4 years prior. because they had already held hearings on this, Chad. But the thing that vexed McCarthy by 1950 was that very little had been done about it, because the communists that were identified, thanks to those in the House of Representatives by bipartisan effort, the executive branch, Chad, took up a policy of forced resignation. So what that did was anyone who was an identified red was not removed from the federal payroll. They were told to resign or be exposed. So, of course, many of them opted to resign. And when they resigned, it was never made public, or that information was never provided to their next employer. So many of them went from one role in the federal government to another. Some of them even went to other positions that you can argue had even more consequence, or had more influence on things politically, because many of them transitioned into these global political bodies like the International Monetary Fund and the UN. Many communists that came into the federal government, Chad, when they were identified by the HUAC committee and later on by the Senate, many of them went on to work for the United Nations.
Right. That's right. That's right.
And so McCarthy came, I'm sorry, Chad, McCarthy came along, and McCarthy was like, wait a minute, this problem still exists. Everything McCarthy said it was nothing new. It had already been exposed. He was just trying to say, wait a minute, why aren't we doing anything about this? If people that already knew, Chad, this goes back to, and I know we talked about the DICE committee in the House Committee on Un-American Activities, but there was another, Chad, investigative body, and this is what really got the ball rolling, Chad. This was in 1930. There was a New York a congressman in the House of Representatives by the name of Hamilton Fish. Hamilton Fish III, as a matter of fact. He was a Republican who left the Republican Party and joined the Progressive Party. Chad, you mentioned Robert La Follette. Hamilton Fish was another member, or not another member, but he was an identified member of the Bull Moose, or the Progressive Party. And he chaired a committee that sought to investigate supposed communist activity along the Pacific coast, particularly in Seattle. This became known to history as the Fish Committee. And this is what really began to shine the light on communist activity in the United States, was in the year 1930. So you fast forward 20 years later, and McCarthy is simply doing what a lot of other politicians had already done.
Yeah.
But again, times had changed, because, Chad, we were going into this new paradigm after World War II. And
right.
So that's just a little hint into what was actually going on at the time.
Just a little taste.
Just a little taste.
Let's see here. So I wanted to show, why can't I see that? That's actually going to irritate me. Man, I thought I had it locked and loaded and ready to go. Is this it? This might be it, actually. Okay, so this is a letter from Robert La Follette, written in 1924. So when I say that his even Joe McCarthy's Republican predecessor, who became, if I'm not mistaken, Chuck, he became a member of the Progressive Party, did he not?
La Follette,
because he was with the Republican Party, but then he became a member of the Progressive Party.
I think he might have. I can't recall off the top of my head, but I think he might have. Yeah. Sometimes I hear people pronounce his name La Follette, so sometimes I say La Follette, sometimes I say La Follette, but yeah, I think whatever, man. We get same guy. We know who we're talking about.
Yeah, we know who we're talking about. So he wrote this letter to the Attorney General Herman Eckern, and if you look at this paragraph right here on the first page, it says, and this, by the way, is on the Marxist.org archive website. Is where you can find this. But he says the communists have admittedly entered into this political movement not for the purpose of curing by means of the ballot the evils which afflict the American people, but only to divide and confuse the progressive movement and create a condition of chaos favorable to their ultimate aims. Their real purpose is to establish by revolutionary action a dictatorship of the proletariat, which is absolutely repugnant to democratic ideals and all American aspirations. The official declaration of the Workers' Party show clearly that they are seeking to use the Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota, other progressive organizations that have lent their names to the convention as a means of advancing their own ends. This shows by an official statement of the Central Executive Committee of the Workers' Party of America. So, I mean, there's a lot more in this letter. And of course, you can find this at Marxist.org, or you can just Google Robert La Follette communists letter, and it should be the first thing that pops up. But again, this is just to give you an example of, like, here's somebody who considered himself Robert La Follette, who considered himself to be part of the progressive movement, and was trying to, in a sense, safeguard the progressive movement, or what his version of the progressive movement was, from communist infiltration. And I don't know, I have mixed feelings about that, Chuck. I'm gonna have to be honest with you.
I do too.
Well, tell me what your mixed feelings are. Go ahead.
I mean, well, well, that's it. But that's a part of the popular front. You know, these progressives, they think that, well, this is my labor union, or this is my organization. All the while, you know, they have no idea that they are actually doing the bidding of communists without actually, you know, without knowing that they're doing it. And this is a self-admitted tactic by the communists themselves, who insulate themselves within these types of organizations, and they are the ones who are the more fervent, the most, you know, they're far more organized and everything else. And you know, Bella Dodd talked about this strategy. Earl Browder and the chairman of the Communist Party before him, William Z. Foster, they all said these exact same things, that they insulate themselves within these progressive movements. All the while, the other members of these organizations have no idea that they've become part of the front. They've become a communist front organization, because we are the one who actually control the organization. And it's kind of weird, because you ask yourself, how do you not know that you're being controlled? How does this not dawn on you? But that's the sick and twisted way that that the subterfuge, the way it works.
Yeah.
You know, but you're right, though. I mean, this is what they do.
I mean, they're definitely, to La Follette's point, or I guess the point from which he was arguing, is lost in the ideological sauce. And so for me, it kind of sheds new light on the fact that, well, maybe when it comes to the Zohar Mamdanis and others, or the AOCs in particular, maybe not so much Mamdani as much as AOC, perhaps they believe that there really is a distinction between, you know, their brand of progressivism and communism.
That's it.
But it's hard to say, because the reality of it is, it doesn't actually matter at the end of the day, insofar that they believe, or they have planted their stake in an ideology that is hostile to the knowledge of God. And that to me, like, you know, people ask all the time whether I think King was aware of what he was doing, and was aware of the ideology that he was helping to advance. And I tell them, like, yes, I do. I believe he was fully aware, but at the same time, it doesn't actually matter, because, you know, he was the gospel was presented to him, which he makes clear in his very own papers. He says in, I think, volume 2 of his papers, that it's the one where he's talking about, it wasn't my pilgrimage to nonviolence. It was he was talking about his autobiography. It's something he wrote in 1950, my autobiography, or something like that. The word autobiography is in the title. Anyway, so he writes about how the gospel that was delivered to him in his formative years was of the fundamentalist line. and he said that I accepted it uncritically, but that uncritical feeling couldn't last long because I was always a precocious and questioning type. And so he's making it clear that I'm fully aware of what Christian fundamentalism is. I'm fully aware of a literal existence and the fundamental claims of the Christian faith. I reject that. I accept a more liberal interpretation, a leftist interpretation of the gospel. And by the time he goes off to college, of course, he is embracing people like George W. Davis, like Morton Ensslin, and other professors who, if you read their work, will tell you that they are critics of the Bible, that they don't believe that this is the inerrant word of God. And so they I know in Morton Enslin's case in particular, he advocated for what he called a new biblical orthodoxy. And so, these were King's professors that he embraced and that he really gleaned from. And it wasn't as if he didn't know any better, because he says with his own words that I know what the fundamental gospel is. I rejected that.
They didn't believe it. Yeah.
So like for me, it's like that right there, among many other things that I can look to, is evidence enough for me to say that he knew the different sides of the arguments, and he made a deliberate decision. And it's interesting because when you look at, have you watched that interview with Nikki Giovanni and
James
Baldwin? Did you watch it all the way through? It's like 2.5 hours long, I think.
I haven't watched the full 2.5 hours of it, no. But I've seen a great chunk of it, but I haven't sat through the entire 2 hours.
What were your briefly? What were your thoughts on it before I tie this back into the King thing?
Well, it's that line, when James Baldwin, talks about Jesus, and of course he considers the story to be preposterous. It's ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense to him. And of course, this is feeds right to the communist way of thinking, in the atheistic underpinnings there, because the idea, of course, is man is to usurp the authority of God, because man believes that they can do it better, that they have a better plan, because God's plan to them just seems completely ridiculous. Let me just go the long route and just quickly bring it back. There's a book out there written by probably, I don't know how many books he wrote, but it's the one he's probably most known for. A Russian communist. He was a one-time, I guess you could say, friend of Karl Marx, until Marx betrayed him and began to accuse him of trying to accuse this person of trying to assassinate him. Karl Marx simply wanted to get rid of him because Karl Marx viewed him as a threat to his power and his authority, because Marx wanted to take over the entire movement. It was called the what was the name of the Communist International at the time? It didn't have that name originally, but anyway, this man was a Russian communist by the name of Mikhail Bakunin. And it was Mikhail Bakunin who really, he was the first major mouthpiece to bring a lot of these anarcho-communist ideas into Russia once he was, chased away by Marx and his contingent. And Mikhail Bakunin wrote a book called God and the State. And there's a passage in that book where Bakunin is opining on the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and the fact that God created man, and he knew, if God, he's all knowing, and he's perfect in every way, and God knew, he should have known, this is from the perspective of Bakunin, that if he set this up this way and gave them all of paradise, but just told them that they couldn't eat of this one tree, God should have known that they were going to do it. So you can't get upset, and you can't about sin being in the world and all this other stuff, because it's essentially God's fault, because he should have known. And not only that, But instead of, and this is Bakunin, he says this in this book, God and the State, instead of punishing the serpent who tempted Eve, he punishes humanity, punishes them and all of their descendants until the end of time. And then, of course, he sends his own son to the one who was innocent. He sends his son to atone for the sins of, a bunch of people who, in Bakunin's mind, are themselves innocent because they had nothing to do with what Adam and Eve did. And so this was a stupid thing for God to do. This was a dumb thing. And then sacrifices his son for everyone else. If God were truly God, right? Because that's the only way for a human being to understand what a all-knowing, all-righteous, perfectly just, perfectly good God would do. He's thinking about it from the perspective of a human being. Like, what would I do if I were in that situation? And so this is the largest arrow in the quiver of the atheist, right? Is the whole subtopic or doctrine of what, how you pronounce it, theodicy or theodicy, this whole notion of suffering in the presence of an all-knowing, all-powerful God. And so God can't be real. God can't exist. Not the kind of God you all are talking about, because if God is who you says that he is, then God wouldn't do such stupid things. So God mustn't be real. And so therefore, if you're telling me that suffering is a part of some overarching divine plan, if you get rid of this overarching divine plan because now you've gotten rid of God, then it becomes man's responsibility to do away with suffering. Suffering is something you can deal with. Suffering is even something you can understand. You've come to accept it if there is a God. But if there is no God, then man is compelled. He's compelled to fix the world. He has to. Why wouldn't he? Because common sense or logic would dictate that it can be done, right? And so this is what this whole thing, Chad, goes back to. And you say when Martin Luther King makes the conscious decision to say, no, none of that is real. I think I'm going to go this way. Now you're obligated to try to do something about it. Now you're obligated to try to fix the world, because God didn't do what you think or what you thought God should have done. And so now it becomes your burden. Now it becomes your responsibility.
Yeah.
And of course, we see how that turns how that turns out.
And what makes it even more diabolical is that not only did he choose to do it his own way, he did so while claiming that he was a pastor, while kind of basking in the title of being the moral leader of the nation, knowing full well he didn't believe genuinely in the faith that he were supposed to be preaching about.
Chad, that's the point. That's because, sorry to cut you off, but because we were talking about Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, and this goes back to what James Baldwin was talking about, the arrogance of him to is similar, the same spirit as Mikhail Bakunin, the old communist from the 1800s. To James Baldwin, the story, it doesn't make sense. He says, why does Jesus have to be born immaculately? What is wrong with a woman having sex and conceiving a baby just like everybody else? He said, I reject that because it doesn't make sense to him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, he goes and he lays down that famous line that at the end of the day, we all knew that Jesus was always a nigga, and then, we, in the midst of, with Cone, and there's another gentleman, Chad. I don't know if you've heard of him. I'll just mention him. Maybe he wasn't as prolific a writer, or maybe he wasn't as good a writer, but James Cone's famous book, what is it called?
There's Crossing the Lynching Tree. There's Black Theology and
Liberation. The Black. I don't know if that was his first published work, but a couple of years before that. Because I think it was, but don't quote me on that. But a couple of years before that, because I think that book was published, I think sometime in the early 60s. But before that, there was another book written by another liberation theologian named Albert Klieg. He wrote a book titled The Black Messiah. I don't know if you're familiar with that book. And he, he embraces these ideas. Of course, Jesus was black, and he's pushing all this stuff that, Jesus was this revolutionary and yada, yada, yada. So this is where all this stuff comes from, that you have to, you have to change the world because God is either moving too slowly or you just don't like his plan.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The reason I brought up that the Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin interview in light of the question of whether King knew what he was doing or didn't know what he was doing, or whether he understood the dangers of the Communist Party or didn't understand the dangers of the Communist Party. No, he knew full well what the dangers were. This is why he talked so flippantly and regularly, routinely about death and about laying his body on the line, and he was so willing to go and endure all of the crowd disbursement tools that were utilized whenever he and his fellow demonstrators didn't pull the permits and would go on their marches and whatnot. In that interview with Nikki Giovanni and James Baldwin, he even said, James Baldwin said that, like, I was a part of the Communist Party growing up. He said, I was part of the Communist Party when I was 19 and 20. He said, you work for them just like you work for anybody else, except that since they're communists, you're not supposed to say that you worked for them. Mm-hmm. And he talked about all the death and all the salacious and scandalous things that he would see. And he ended up leaving the Communist Party. But what's interesting is his why. He says that he left the Communist Party not because they were communists, but because they were Americans. And so he had this idea that Soviet communists were more friendly. They weren't as sinister. They weren't as clandestine. Yeah. They weren't as murderous as American communists. It's their Americanism that makes them wrong, not their communism that makes them wrong. And that's why he left the party. But anyway, so it was well understood that not only do they move so covertly, but these were a very utilitarian, very wicked people. This was understood by Baldwin. This was understood by King and all the others. Yet and still, King chose to dance with the devil, to put it frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. No. When you say that, James Baldwin saying that because they were American, it reminds me of Marcus Garvey. As a matter of fact, a lot of people. When you bring up Garvey and communism, people point out the fact that, no, Garvey was an anti-communist. No, he wasn't. I don't, I'm not going to talk too much about that to get too far off the subject. But he had a similar attitude that James Baldwin did, because Garvey was quite fond of Trotsky. He was quite fond of Lenin. As a matter of fact, Garvey just didn't like American communists. He particularly didn't like black communists, and I believe he didn't like them for selfish reasons, because they were a threat to his position as the de facto, or maybe even the de jure leader of black folks all across the Western Hemisphere, because you had a lot of black communists that he was. Like George Padmore and a lot of these characters, many of them were members of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, and some of them had dual membership to his organization. They were also members of the Communist Party, or sometimes they would be members of his organization and they would leave the Communist Party. And Cyril Briggs, the founder of a communist contingent here, I think Cyril Briggs, I think it was, Trinidad? I'm trying to remember what country he was born in, but of course, Chad, you're familiar with a group called the African Blood Brotherhood. Mm-hmm. This was a rival organization to the UNIA, and they would try to infiltrate they would try to infiltrate, these communists try to infiltrate his organization. Well, Garvey didn't like that, again, because they were clandestine. It's like, how dare you come in and try to, this is my house, this is my thing. But he would make these grandiose overtures, and he would glaze and just go crazy over Vladimir Lenin. As a matter of fact, when Lenin passed away, because of course, Lenin, Chad, and the Soviets, they represented the anti-imperialist, the anti-colonial, spirit, and when Lenin passed away in 1924, Garvey would issue a speech before I guess you can call it a delegation of his, titled the speech was titled "The Passing of the World's Great Man." He thought Garvey would state that Lenin was the greatest man alive, the greatest man that had ever lived. And when Lenin passed away, he kind of gave him an informal eulogy in a speech that he gave. But Garvey didn't hate communism. He just hated black communists because he wanted to be the one in charge. But he loved Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. He thought they were great.
Right. 100%. Looks like we are out of town. We got 5 minutes. So I'll read some questions. But Chuck, you and I, let's definitely talk offline and continue this conversation, because there's a lot that needs to be corrected, and we're not going to correct it all in a 2-hour conversation unless you're writing a book, or unless you're about to do some series, some video series or something that we don't know about. Let's keep this conversation going.
Yeah, man. Because McCarthy, we barely touched on McCarthy, because I know, child.
But I mean, there's so much to
a lot of people. Can I before we go, Chad? You said we got 5 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm about to go through the questions.
Okay, all right. Because I want to really give some more context to that portion of the docu-series where this guy Joe Welsh is, he starts crying and doing all of that. I want to give him.
Let's do that. Let's do that sometime.
Okay.
Next week if you have time.
I got you.
Because I actually want to spend some time on that and not try to rush it.
I got you.
So let's see. Dayon, he gave us a super chat. Please put McCarthy was right on some merchandise. Yeah, somebody on Patreon said that we should turn that into a shirt. McCarthy was right on a shirt. So I'm surprised nobody's come up with that idea before. I don't know if that's already an idea. You just don't see them around. Or maybe did TPUSA do something like that? Actually, now that I think about it,
I don't know.
So I would wear that shirt. Coltrane, $20 says, have y'all listened to the George Schuyler Malcolm X debate? Schuyler doesn't say as much as Malcolm, but when he does, he destroys him. I can't read this black against this blue. Like, y'all can see orange and white, but I'm seeing black and blue, and the black is like such thin font, and the blue is like this weird baby blue. I don't know if can you see that too? The black and blue.
Mm-mm.
You don't see this comment that I'm looking at? Like, you see it in white, don't you?
All I see is white. White and orange.
I promise y'all, I don't have a caption or anything. It's just like what y'all can see on YouTube up here, and what I'm seeing right here is like the color scheme makes it hard to read. So let me get closer. Y'all all up in my grill. Schuyler doesn't say much, or as much as Malcolm, but when he does, he destroys him. Malcolm was a pseudo-intellectual, a paper tiger, but a broken clock is right twice a day. Okay.
Coltrane, I'm so glad you said it, because when we do these talks, when Chad puts out his content on Instagram, there's always someone who has to come in talking about, you see, this is why they don't promote Malcolm, because he was right, Martin was wrong, and Malcolm had the answer, and Malcolm warned black people about liberals, and Malcolm is like you said, Malcolm was a pseudo-intellectual and a paper tiger, and Malcolm was arguably a more ardent leftist than MLK was. I mean, they were virtually the same individual. It's just that King was more palatable. and Malcolm wasn't as suave and sophisticated. He didn't know how to hide his extremism as well as King did, but they were virtually, thinking with the same brain. They're virtually the same person. Malcolm was Malcolm was not the person that a lot of people, like to, think he is in this so-called conservative space. Unfortunately, I'm glad you said it, because I reject Malcolm whole
You
cloth. I reject it.
you have some you have a series on Malcolm too, don't you? Or no?
I did one YouTube video on Malcolm, just kind of giving a brief outline of the theory, the ideology of the Nation of Islam, and also, Malcolm X's views post his Hajj in early 1964, when he converted to Sunni Islam and really began to embrace more of these secular Marxian ideas, and because she was connecting with these other African Marxists like Kwame Nkrumah and Fidel Castro in Latin America and Che Guevara and all these people. Malcolm was very, very fond of them, and they were fond of him.
And not only that, I mean, when people praise Malcolm X for his do for self rhetoric and all the things, it's like Malcolm X, or not Malcolm X. When people praise Malcolm X, where's my brain? Where people praise Malcolm X, or well, he was talking about do for self at the same time that Martin King was trying to beg the government. This do for self attitude, you'll notice that he would always say, well, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad said that if the Negro actually must, pool his resources and like these were things that Booker T. Washington was saying years before Elijah Muhammad even thought about them. But not only that, these are quintessentially biblical principles. And so it isn't as Malcolm X had this novel idea that no one ever heard of before in terms of spending your money, building businesses, doing all these things. It wasn't as if we needed a what do these people call themselves? A Nation of Islam Muslim to tell us that we have to build businesses, and it wouldn't have been done without him. Like, what are we talking about?
Right. I got a couple of books here, as a matter of fact, on Malcolm. Some of his, just exploring some of his ideas, and the fact that Malcolm X. I mean, Malcolm X was a Marxist. He called himself a Muslim, but he was a Marxist, and that's what quote unquote Black Islam, or what you want to call it here in the United States. It's nothing. It's liberation theology in an Islamic garb, as opposed to a Christian garb, is what it is. One of the earliest, the so-called founder of Pan-Africanism, in fact, was a man named William Blyden. This was back in the 1800s, and he was making the case back in the 1800s that the religion, the true religion of the Black man who wants to seek his liberation, or whatever the case, he should drop Christianity and embrace Islam. This was back in the 1800s. William Blyden, the father of Pan-Africanism. You can look him up, and then you fast forward a few decades later, we saw the rise of Noble Drew Ali, and then Farad Muhammad, and so on and so forth. And so this is about political liberation. This is about critical race theory, liberation theology. That's what the Nation of Islam and all that stuff is all about. But yeah, make no mistake about it, Malcolm X was a Marxist.
Thank you, Coltrane, for that comment. Let's see. We got one from DT, $5 super sticker. Thank you. I got one from Dayon again, $5. Democratic Socialist Kelsey Band won Atlanta City Council seat, Soviet Atlanta. Is she really a Democratic Socialist, or are you just saying that based upon her walking, quacking, and talking like a duck? I haven't heard that name before. Keisha Bond. Oh yeah, I have. What am I saying? Keisha Bond. I thought it said band because you got that black and blue again. So here's what's happening. Every time I click on a comment to display it on the screen, what I see is this weird color scheme. So I need to actually get that figured out. Because anyway. It's my personal problems, I guess. We got one from Coltrane again. Manning, Johnson, and McCarthy would have been the dream team. I mean, you have a lot of people who were sounding the alarm as far as communism is concerned. It's, Chuck mentioned J.B. Matthews.
I was gonna say,
When you look at J.B. Matthews, when you look at Joe McCarthy, when you look at Julia Brown, when you look at on and on I can go, they all suffered the same fate in terms of being viewed as discredited, or they're just disgruntled, and they're this, that, and the third. They're not to be believed. When you look at the smear campaign that was leveled against them after sounding the alarm, all of that's kind of par for the course, and this is why for me it's like, I don't know, Chuck, maybe the same thing will end up happening to you and myself.
Man, it is what it is, man. Hopefully I'll be, with my Heavenly Father. So by then, I won't be stressing it. But if I can just comment on that, I mean, Manning Johnson and Joe McCarthy, I mean, that would have been a great thing. McCarthy had a lot of great, I mean, you mentioned the J.B. Matthews. He summoned another major figure in the communist movement back then during one of the Senate hearings. He summoned a man named Louis Baudins. He and his brother Leonard, major figures in the Communist Party. He testified because by that time Louis Baudins had abandoned communism, and he came forth to testify before the Senate. And Millard Tidings and their contingent just ripped Boudin's a new one. It was so strange, Chad, because, well, I don't know. I don't know if you want me to go into detail about what happened when Louis Baudin's testified, but I just won't go into any details. But maybe next time. But J.B. Matthews. J.B. Matthews, I mean, he was the guy, the one. He probably knew more about Communist Front activity than any other person in the country. And we mentioned, Chad, his essay in the periodical in the Mercury periodical, Reds in Our Churches. And but before he would team up with McCarthy, because McCarthy had a great investigative team. Of course, one of his investigators, one of his staffers was none other than a young 20-something-year-old Robert Kennedy. But he had a lot of guys on his team, and J.B. Matthews was one of them. But J.B. Matthews was also the lead and chief investigator for the House of Representatives during the Dyes hearings. So he had been doing this for a long time. I don't know if you're familiar with this document. It is considered, and you guys can go and find it, try to look this up. It is considered the largest dossier and expose of communists in the federal government and Communist Front Group activity. It's called Appendix 9. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's called Appendix 9. It was written by J.B. Matthews. It was a write-up by the House of Representatives of a particular investigation they had conducted into communist infiltration, and the appendix was written by J.B. Matthews. It's a massive dossier of communists in the United States. J.B. Matthews was a big deal. He was a Methodist minister, so he knew the church quite well. He was a Methodist minister. He had a bachelor in divinity from a college. I forgot which college he went to in Chad. He also received a degree from Union Theological Seminary. I don't know if we mentioned Union Theological Seminary in the docu-series. I know we mentioned Crozer, obviously, but Union Theological Seminary was another hot. It was a nest.
Yeah, we did because
beehive of communist Union Theological Seminary.
Yeah, Reinhold Niebuhr taught there, so we did mention it.
Yep, J.B. Matthews graduated from there, and a lot of his communist work happened when he was posing as a Christian missionary, as a Methodist minister.
Yeah.
And J.B. Matthews was, after he released, and I'm only bringing this up because we already covered in the documentary, once he released his article, Reds in Our Churches, the political class led by Dwight Eisenhower, we'll get into it, and the media, they destroyed J.B. Matthews after he wrote that article. And they got many of the so-called liberal or left-wing Protestants to to call for his removal from Joe McCarthy's staff. And in a rare episode of McCarthy kowtowing and backing down, McCarthy, you can say, he folded to the pressure, and JB Matthews was forced to resign after that article that came out, because it was played up, Chad, that this was all a smear to try to destroy the Protestant church, or to try to discredit Protestantism. That wasn't the case at all. He was trying to protect it. He was trying to defend it.
Right. There's a lot I want to say to that, but I'll get to it next time.
I'm sorry, bro. I shouldn't even say
you're
it.
fine. You're fine, because you actually have my juices going, and but I'll save it for next time. I have to write it down as soon as we get off. Brown Eye says, let's see. I could not find how to watch the MLK Project. Can I watch it anytime or only in parts? So you can watch, if your question is, how should I word this? If your question is, can you only watch it through IG Reels, Instagram Reels, or is there a way to watch the full episodes? The answer is yes. You can go to chadojackson.com, and you have 2 digital options to watch, and then you can also buy the DVDs. Or if your question is, can I only watch it in parts in terms of the episodes, or is there a place that I can watch the entire thing all the way through? The answer to that question is to wait till season 1 is done. You can buy the DVD and you can play all the episodes all the way through, or after the season is done, you can buy the entire season as a package deal digitally. So if you wanted to wait and just binge watch the whole thing, again, that will be at the end of November. But hopefully you're understanding my answer to your question, because your question depends on whether what you've seen so far has been the episodes on chadojackson.com, or whether what you've seen so far has been the IG Reels. But yeah, the bits and pieces that you're seeing in IG Reels come from the actual episodes, which you can get access to by going to chadojackson.com. Did that make sense, Chuck, the way I explained that, or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
It did. I think it did.
Okay.
I ain't trying to be funny, but I know, it makes sense to me.
Okay. Cool. Alrighty. So let's see. Christian Johnson, can you explain the voting patterns of the 60s? Was the black voter suppression exaggerated? Poll taxes, written tests, etc. Very briefly, so the poll tax was not exclusive to black folks. The poll tax was there to basically gauge a person who is interested in voting, their knowledge, their civic responsibility, whether they actually had the knowledge to make a decision that will impact the life of the entire community. And that's the way it ought to be. The whole litmus test that was thrown out because it was seen as racist, it was marketed as racist, or slandered, I should say, as racist by the communist types, by the so-called progressive types, by the civil rights activist types, when in reality, like, there were a lot of white folks who were denied from the registrar's office because they weren't able to pass some of these poll taxes or pass some of these tests. And so I think personally we should bring the test back. I genuinely do. I think that not only do we need to bring the test back, but there needs to be a robust and rigorous list of qualifications that one must meet to be able to vote. But even though I think that is the case, I think that there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of regaining the reins of our constitutional republic. Voting is way down the list. There's a lot of things that need to happen before we will ever get back to it. Because the reality of it is, generationally speaking, we're so far removed, once again, from those virtues that are necessary to have a constitutional republic. So you can bring it back, the poll tax and all those things, but to the extent that you still have a people who hates virtue, you're going to end up right back at square one. So there's things that we need to do on the ground within the culture before we can get back to any sense of virtue as a society as it pertains to how we're governed and so on. But I don't want. I'm not too optimistic when it comes to things like that, because I don't think it will ever be achieved in my lifetime. That's for sure. But then too, to the extent that I make that my focus and not the furthering and advancing of God's kingdom my focus, then what am I doing? So I think the most noble charge of all is to preach Christ and Him crucified, and to basically, use this platform that I have, use my ability to make films and to, work in the arts and to write and to do all the things to try to make people aware of how we're being taken advantage of in terms of our empathy being weaponized, our lack of information, our lack of knowledge, and our poor schooling being weaponized against us, that we might be participants in the ushering in of a new order and of a new world and all the things, and how that's antithetical to the gospel. I use my platform to educate and to point people to Christ, because I see that as doing my small little part to try to get back to, what saith the Lord. I don't know. What's your answer to that question, Chuck?
Yeah, similarly, it's along the lines of what you said. No, there was no black voter suppression. I mean, of course, it may seem that way, but the reality is that in the South in particular, of course, I mean, even in some certain northern states during Reconstruction, ironically, blacks were barred from voting in certain northern states. But this is one of the reasons why the South implemented, and this is another one of the reasons why they seceded, because they could see a lot of issues on the horizon, particularly when it came to the Whigs and then the later Republican Party. This is a lot of things Chad and I covered in the previous live stream that we did. Voting was one of those issues that a lot of Southerners, across the various Southern states, felt like the federal government was going to circumvent or upend their political authority by determining who could vote and who couldn't vote in their own individual states. In other words, many in the South didn't believe that these newly freed, still largely illiterate Negroes should not have such a responsibility, because they knew that these people would be used, because with the federal government that was led by the Republican Party at the time was going to engage in various forms of political patronage so as to increase the size of the federal government at the expense of the states. And this is how this whole thing began, with trying to put some barriers in place so as to make it a little bit tougher for people to vote, because the Union in the Union and the Republican Party had a lot in their camp who had a lot of admiration and what have you for Karl Marx. Again, that's another conversation. We kind of touched on it a lot before. But that's where that whole thing came from, was this attempt by way of the South to keep the federal government from overreaching by using blacks to do so. This is why, Chad talked about this era that people talk, well, all the Republican Party, was, we let all the blacks in, and all the earliest politicians and, folk, the Republican Party was our party back then. That's not quite the flex that you all think it is. You muted, Chad.
I said not even a little bit.
Yeah. So Christian Johnson. So that's my response to that question. This is, everybody shouldn't be able to vote just because I'm 18. I'm about to. No, it shouldn't work that way.
Right. That's a podcast in itself, by the way.
In itself, yeah, man. I mean, dude, what are we? It's just
so much to talk about.
So much to talk about, man.
In modern times, this one's from Martian Kuhn. That name's funny to me. In modern times, in some aspects, McCarthy was the Trump of the Senate in terms of the establishment reaction. he did try to warn us against commies. I mean, I don't think.
I get his point.
I think that's giving Trump too much of a compliment to be to be honest with you. The fact is, let me not actually. Let me give this one to Chuck.
No, I listen. I get his point. I get what Martian Coon is trying to say. He's just talking figuratively. The reaction of the again, and this is why this conversation, like Chad said, we're going to come back and we're going to probably do a few live streams to really unpack it, because you had a lot of intramural and intra-institutional squabbles going on. You had Hoover and the FBI as an extension of the Justice Department. The FBI and its head, J. Edgar Hoover, is under the dictates of the Attorney General, who's appointed by the President of the United States. You had Harry Truman and then later on Dwight Eisenhower, when communist penetration was getting exposed for the first time before the public. A lot of people were shocked and in awe, like, what in the world has been going on? So when the executive branch and the President of the United States began to get blowback, they started to put the blame on Hoover and the FBI, saying that they weren't doing their job. Hoover would get upset and say, wait a minute, I told y'all, and y'all didn't do anything about it. And it became this whole thing. You had security professionals and screeners within the Department of State, they were sending information to McCarthy and others in the Senate, or the Congress. Truman was trying to figure out where the leaks was coming from because he wanted to shut it down, so as not to embarrass the executive branch, to embarrass the White House, to smear or besmirch the legacy of his political mentor, FDR. Eisenhower felt the same way because of McCarthy's attacks or his criticism toward George C. Marshall. It's a whole thing, but there was so much back and forth going on this side, that it was partisanship going on. It was intra governmental friction and stuff going on. It was so much going on, but Martian Coon, like I say, I get his point, and it's funny, Chad. And I'll just end it here. We think of this era as McCarthy just, oh my God, he's pointing the finger at this one and that one and ruining people's reputation and doing all this and doing all of that. But the reality is, the irony is that this era, McCarthyism, it became an ism. It bears his namesake, this witch hunting. But in point of fact, during this time, like Trump in many respects, it was McCarthy who was under investigation, not the communists that he was identifying. It was McCarthy himself who was under investigation, because from the time McCarthy made his first major accusation about communist penetration, it happened in 1950 in Wheeling, Virginia, at the Women's Republican, what was it called? It was some Republican event to commemorate it was Lincoln's birth. It was some kind of Republican celebration at the Women's Republican Club in Wheeling, Virginia in 1950. McCarthy made you guys can look this up. It's called the Wheeling speech, McCarthy's Wheeling speech. And he said in his speech that, we got communists in our government, yada, yada, yada. Once Truman heard that, it was on. We got to get rid of this guy, because McCarthy, everybody knew, but McCarthy was the only one that was willing to say it. He was the one who wasn't supposed to be saying it, but they were investigating him. And that's what eventually led to his censure for his refusal to participate in an investigation where they were actually trying to dig up his financial records. And McCarthy said, I'm not going to put up with that. And that's what led to his censure.
How many of y'all want to see a McCarthy documentary? Just type in yes.
So I'm telling you, Chad, I got so much information on McCarthy that I'm sitting on, bro.
not a documentary, a docudrama. How many of y'all want to see a McCarthy docudrama? Just type in yes in the comment section. You up for that, Chuck? Want to be the co-producer?
Oh yeah, but I don't know if I could produce. I don't know if I could do. I don't know what that consists of, man.
Robert says yes.
Did,
Dave,
did, did I say did I say Wheeling, Virginia? I meant to say Wheeling, West Virginia. Wheeling, it was in West Virginia. I'm sorry.
okay. Got Robert and Dave both said yes. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Got one from Albert Maximilian. Says, "Hey Chad, big fan here. I love your work. I assume the music you play at the start of the beginning of your lives are AI generated with prompts requesting substantive lyrics. Do I love okay, first of all, no, that's not it at all. I write all my own lyrics. I don't have AI write lyrics for me. I have like literally journals full of lyrics. Not only lyrics, but like poems and all kinds of other things that I've written myself. So that's actually an insult. That's actually an insult.
I was gonna say that's crazy. AI is writing lyrics. That's crazy, man. This is getting out of hand.
But thanks, Albert. Appreciate the $20. Let's see. Alethea, $5. Thank you for the super sticker. We got one from Kyle Huggett. Chad, I watched your discussion with Vince Everett Ellison. I'm humbled. I should probably turn this light off so I can read this. I'm humbled and embarrassed at how brainwashed I've been. God bless you both. Thank you, Kyle. Really appreciate it. And I'm interested in hearing what you guys say, especially after episode 8. I'm interested in kind of coming back here and having a conversation and seeing what your guys' thoughts are. Those of you who've actually watched the MLK Project, that's available right now at chadojackson.com. After you watch it, episodes 1 through 8 right now, I think we just now dropped episode 6 this past weekend. So we have 2 episodes to go before the end of season 1. I'm interested in hearing your guys' thoughts, your feedback, and having kind of a rap, like an online rap party, as it were. So anyway, but yeah, thank you for that. That was a really good conversation with Vince. Dayon said Kelsey Bond is a self-described socialist. Okay, well there you go. Is it Kelsey Bond or Keisha Bond? Didn't he say Keisha earlier?
I thought he said Kelsey.
Okay.
I thought he said Kelsey. Scroll up.
35 Colorado says
he said Kelsey.
Okay, good. Have you noticed the Marxist ideology that has permeated all aspects of our lives, education, media, movies, etc.? And how do you defeat it now? Yeah, I mean, we talk about that often. That has permeated all of these. I mean, in Uncle Tom 2, we talk about how it's permeated all these different corners and pockets. In the MLK Project, we talk about how it's permeated education. Actually, I don't think we talk about education until we get to season 2. But yeah, totally. The way that we defeat it is by making people aware of it. And the fact is, that really just boils down to the person, quite frankly, because not everybody's going to take the information and see it as of any, thing that requires urgency. But then you have some people who will see this and say, oh, wow, I need to pay more attention to that, or I need to pull my children out of this school and then put them in that school, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. I need to, there's people that are going to say to themselves, I noticed that my pastor is on this kind of social justice tip, and we need to probably go find another church. So, I mean, those are decisions that people are going to make. I don't think that there's a one size fits all unilateral fix to defeat it. I think, that decision is left up to each individual and how they respond to the information. All I can do is put the information out. So, man, Chuck, I'm a little annoyed by that whole AI thing. Is like, like AI is ruining the game, because it's like you can't like actually write something and have it be good without people accusing you of using AI to write it. You know what
Man,
I'm saying?
it's that's what's crazy. And it's crazy. I'm not trying to brag or say I'm some genius, but I don't even think to. It doesn't even cross my mind. Like, it just doesn't even. It doesn't even register. If I want to find out something, if I want to learn something, like I don't know, man. I go and read a book. I go and listen. Like it's like sometimes I forget it even exists. I'm like, wow, like really, this people really do this, huh? It's crazy. When I was listening to my kids have a conversation amongst themselves one day, and they were talking about friends of theirs who use Chat GPT to write their text messages. I'm just like, text messages. Out looking at the way you all write the shorthand, and you can't write cursive, can't spell no more. Everything has been abbreviated and all these acronyms and crap, and you can't even do that. You need Chat GPT to write your text messages. It's crazy, man. But the visual stuff, man, and now you got to question everything you see. It's wild, man. I think that, yeah, that's wild. I will say this though, I have been getting a kick out of that online trend of people taking famous dead celebrities and acting like they're WWF wrestlers, like they heel. Like, have you seen those reels of MLK in the ring? Like he's a wrestling heel, and he's giving his whole little he and his Martin Luther King mode. And he acting like he a bad guy wrestler in the ring, and I was cracking up laughing at those. I could get a kick out of those, but all in all, man, the laugh ain't worth it, man. It's terrible, man.
Yeah. It's let's see. Let's see. Kevin Bonham Jr. Steve Coakley.
Is there any truth to what he said? I don't know if you know who Steve Coakley is, Chad. Steve Coakley said a lot of things, Kevin. So I would need you to be a little bit more specific. You know, Steve Coakley is a guy who, when I was young and in that phase where I was, Coakley. Do you know who Steve Coakley is, Chad?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so Steve Coakley he's a black man, and he was very conspiratorial, always, he's one of these guys always talking about how can I put it, man? He's in that camp of like all those underground so-called lecturers. He's considered to be like one of the legends of the black conscious community. I don't even know if you know what I mean when I say that, but like your Dr. Umar types, your Brother Polite types, these kinds of guys. Steve Coakley, he was like one of them way back in the 80s, 90s, and he would go on a lecture circuit and he would talk about all of these various conspiracies and things going on in the entertainment industry and this and that, and but at the end of the day, it was just a lot of poison rhetoric. It just made you, bitter and angry and nihilistic, and made you want to, kind of overthrow the system kind of guys, and the white man and the Jewish man, and just pure poison. There's a famous debate between he and Larry Elder from a while ago, and it's quite the spectacle to watch it. But yeah, Steve Coakley is like a hero to a lot of angry militant black people. He's like a legend in that amongst that circle.
Gotcha.
But he's nobody. He's nobody that you should even care about.
Cool. I'm actually going in my head right now because I'm thinking about like releasing these demos of the songs that that I put that date as far back as like 2013.
Right. Just so y'all know, man, this ain't no AI.
The problem with this. The problem with that though is that people will have to hear me sing, and I don't want people to hear me sing. So should I play one right now?
You did do that. You did put out one reel where you had your original lyrics and you actually performed it. You remember that?
Yeah, that's right. I did do that. See, that's pretty positive. And that was before this whole AI rise.
Yeah, bro, that was about a year. That was like a long time ago.
Yeah, or I'm wearing the cowboy. Yeah, okay. I might re-release that. I should just get out of my head and stop worrying about what people think. So, but and the question, I don't think the question was underhanded or anything like that. But it's like, I guess, like what, like using AI to like actually perform a song, that's one thing. But using AI to like actually write the lyrics, that's not what we do over here.
Not what we do here. We don't do that here.
Your time, so let's go ahead and keep it moving. Christian Johnson said, just to clarify, I 100% agree with y'all. I really was trying to see if we could go back to how voting used to be. Chad, I agree. We are many steps away. Yeah, and
can we start with repealing the 19th Amendment? Oh, who said that?
What about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment?
Get rid of them too. 13th, 14th, and 15th, terrible. Well, you know, maybe, well, especially, well, yeah. Anyway, like I said, we covered that. I said in the docu series in episode 1 when I brought up the Corwin Amendment, because he was the author of it. It was proposed, and there was an attempt to amend the Constitution to add it. But what it would have did was I said that it would have legalized slavery across the country, but to be more precise, it would have permitted the federal government from criminalizing slavery. It would have cemented, it would have grafted it onto the Constitution and would have made it illegal for the federal government to take the initiative to end slavery. It would have put it in writing. And when the Confederates when they drafted their Constitution, they put it in their Constitution that the Confederate government had no right to impose upon the states and end slavery on the states on behalf of the individual states.
Yeah. Dave said we should get rid of the 16th while we're at it, and the 17th, I guess. 17th, 18th as well. So,
yeah, I think the man should vote for his family, Chad. I think the man should vote for his wife and for his children.
Oh, you're one of those?
I don't know. You know what though, Chad? Let me stop. Let me stop.
No, I'm just
I know.
I'm definitely one of those. But at the same time, if you're a female, like if you're a widow, if you're unmarried woman,
that's the thing. I haven't figured it out.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I haven't figured it out. I don't know what the answer is.
Yeah.
Of course, the 19th Amendment it will never be repealed.
Yeah.
You say the 17th. I don't like the way the 17th Amendment was terrible, but yeah, I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet. I think the voting age is too young. It's too young.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that a man who, but I don't know, man. Should you have to own a home for something, bro? There has to be something. I don't know what it is yet, but voting, it shouldn't be, oh, I'm 18 now, I get to vote. It should not be that easy. I haven't figured it out yet. I'm still playing around with some ideas, but it shouldn't be that easy.
That we should go on a crusade to get rid of the 19th Amendment. That get rid of the woman's right to vote. I think it's something that we've had for over 100 years. It's going to be with us for a long time. And to the extent that we try so hard to get rid of that amendment, not to say that you're doing that or I'm doing that,
right,
and not focus on the virtues that is necessary for a society where strong men are voting, property owners are voting, I think that the more important task at hand is to basically spread the truth of the gospel and the culture, hope that permeates hearts, and then from there that will become political action and things of that nature, so
yeah. No, I'm just having a little fun because I know that kind of gets people going.
Well, what do you think of that though?
I agree. I agree. Nothing more to say, bro. I'm with you 100%.
Man, I gave you the floor. I gave you the solo screen and everything.
Oh. My bad, man. I shirked on that one, man. I just really didn't have anything else to add, bro. I agree with
Dave
that.
says if you don't pay taxes, you can't vote for starters. Yeah, I think
That's
that's
something, bro. If you're getting welfare benefits, you can't vote, bro. You gotta get off the dole.
That's something I think we should do. We can actually do readily. But yeah, the getting women, like taking away the woman right to vote. I think that's something that's going to take strategic, patient, cultural ground up.
Yeah, you're gonna have to go probably with a convention of states. You're not gonna get the federal government to do it,
right?
But
But yeah, making it to where only taxpayers can vote, I'm all for that.
Yeah, but
we should put on the docket tomorrow. So,
yes, you cannot be on the dole voting, bro. That's insane.
Mm-hmm.
It's insane. You're
right.
voting. You said you vote. You're not going to do anything but vote to take away the freedom of another person, to take the property of someone else. It's just terrible, man. It's a terrible situation.
Oh, really? MLK Project can be considered UT3? I mean, technically.
Virtually.
Technically. No, I don't think there's going to be a UT3, to be honest with you. I'm no longer with the company that produced Uncle Tom and Uncle Tom 2. So if they do an Uncle Tom 3, likely I won't be in it. But as far as my independent projects are concerned, the MLK Project is my research, Chuck's research, Vince Ellison's research, Dr. Carol Swain's research being brought to life through a docuseries. So it's not part of the Uncle Tom franchise, but it's what I have to offer. Beauty for Ashes. Does the MLK Project go deeper as to why he received the Margaret Sanger Award? Loving the music, by the way. Thank you, Beauty for Ashes. Yes, season two will. Oh. In fact, Chuck, I owe you a visit up in Detroit so we can try to. And one of the beautiful things about doing a docuseries as opposed to a documentary is you have time to get a sense of what kind of questions the audience have and how deep they want to go into various aspects of the movement. And you're able to, pack up your camera equipment and go and really kind of expound on things. So that's one of the providential beauties of the fact that this ended up being a docuseries as opposed to a one-sitting documentary. What do you think about that, Chuck?
Yeah, that is. I mean, yeah, man, because that way, like you said, you could go back, you can add on and edit and do little things. Like, I mean, because when she asked that question, I shook my head. I was like, nah, I don't think we really touched on that. But you said that we are, and then you said that you come back up to Detroit and probably do some more filming. So yeah, that's a great advantage, man, of doing it the way you're doing it, and having these shows interspersed, in between the episodes, and doing the Q&As, and you with Vince a couple of days ago, a few days before that you were with Virgil. So and then people can ask questions, and we can kind of go off the cuff and talk about some other things related to the series. And so I think the way you're doing it is just giving us an opportunity to just really supplement the whole experience, man. So I'm glad you ended up doing it this way.
Yeah. Dave Murpin said, what do you guys think is our most imminent threat? Marxism and communism, Islam, or Congress driving us to financial default?
That's a tough question. I was just I just had a conversation with someone recently, and I mentioned that Islam is arguably the greatest danger confronting the West. But I won't split hairs and say it's this or that. It's interesting because you can really, as they call it, the Red and Green Alliance. I mean, you can really fuse Islam and Marxism together. Beginning with and not so much the rise of Arab liberation. I'm not going to get into a whole because that's a whole nother discussion, a whole nother can of worms, because Islam has been Islam and Islam has been Islam and since the 7th century. But when you start to talk about Marxism, start to talk about communism, Islamic liberation has hitched its wagon to every totalitarian regime since going back to the 1920s, 1930s, and the rise of Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, and then after the fall of the Axis powers and Islamic liberation began to hitch its wagon to the Soviet Union. In the early 1940s, you guys can look into this. There was a book written by an Islamic scholar by the name of Saeed Qutb. Saeed Qutb. That's spelled Qutb. I think that's how you spell his last name. He wrote a book called. He was an Egyptian. He wrote a book titled "Social Justice and Islam." Social Justice and Islam. This was in the 1940s, and his book sort of like became the model, if you will. But it didn't just simply begin with him. You had a lot of these kind of leftist Islamic types even long before Saeed Qutb. This is going way back to the 1910s, 1920s in Persia and in other parts of the Islamic world. And so you can really sort of fuse Islam and Marxism together. But that's a very, very nuanced discussion, a very, very layered conversation.
Yeah, I want to circle back to that real quickly. Robert, just want to acknowledge him. He says, taking away people's right to vote sounds horrible until you understand the founding of the country. There's no way to say it without people being able to paint you as a bigot. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I really recommend people watch a lecture that R.C. Sproul gave, the late R.C. Sproul, where he's comparing a republic to a democracy. I'm sorry, democracies to monarchies and dictatorships. And the reality of it is, when you consider the republic and the word citizen and what is meant, and Chuck has spoke about this at length. The word this word citizen and how it's slept on. The question becomes, who is a citizen in a republic? And of course, that definition has proven to change over time, particularly within our American context. And so, when you look no further than the whole immigration issue, not only is there a strong contingent here in the States who believe that citizenship should be just flippantly expanded to people who have come here 2 seconds ago, but they also are demonstrating this by giving them licenses, by giving them welfare and all the whole nine. I don't even believe that we should have welfare to begin with. I believe that we were getting along fine before welfare became a government issue, because prior to that, you had it done on a peer-to-peer level with churches and missionaries and things of this nature. But the fact that there were requirements attached to that in terms of you pulling your own weight and lifting your own, doing your part, so to speak. So we're kind of landing the plane here. I just wanted to play this real quickly to tie it back to the point that you made about Islamic communism, social justice. Jason Whitlock called me a few days ago because of this whole debate between the Tuckers and the Candaces and you know, the Brandon Tatums and everything that's going on right now with your conservative influencers. And I told him, because he asked me what my take was on the whole, like, you know, Islam and Judaism and Israel, and should the state of Israel exist? And I don't want to put words in his mouth, but we were just having this conversation. And I said, well, like, I think from a practical point of view, and I think, Chuck, you would share in this opinion, Israel should obviously remain a state because it has to do with the preservation of Western civilization in itself. And obviously, you'd rather Israel remain a state than to see the spread of Islam across Europe, which is already happening across that part of the country, and into the Western world at large. So that's just surely from a practical point of view.
Right.
But then you begin to look at other nuances to the situation and see that in the same way that many Islamists have been responsible for the spread of social justice and other such things, so too have a lot of these self-described Jews. You know, I wanted to play this clip real quick from Ben Kamen, who is the author of a book called Dangerous Friendship.
Which
I
I've
want you to
read.
listen to something that he says, because, you know, I'm about to play this clip, but Chuck, I'm sure you're aware of this. I've seen other such verbiage by other Jews, ethnic Jews. Saul Alinsky. There was a documentary that was done by a Canadian filmmaker back in the 60s or early 70s, and says Saul Alinsky, as a Jew who've always, you know, our people have always been persecuted against, and we have it in our DNA to fight for social justice. Anywhere in the world where we find injustice, we fight for social justice. So I've always been a radical, and I've always been this, you know. So the fact that it was so easy for him to get into this position of organizing and educating other people on how to organize, how to agitate, how to shake things up. When you look at, you know, Stanley Levison and the letters that he wrote to King, some of those letters are available in the King Papers, the 7 volumes of the King Papers. We actually have one of the excerpts from such a letter that he wrote to King in episode 8 of the MLK Project. So you see this Eric Mann, who's an ethnic Jew, talks about how it's in our DNA to fight for social justice. So you see this kind of mantra, and I wanted to play an example of that real quick and just add a bit of nuance to this conversation. Let's see, here we go.
Who has made the writings of King his life's work.
And Rabbi, the role of the Jewish community, it was so important. It was so integral, especially during the 1960s. Why? Did so many get involved?
Well, there are a number of reasons. One is it's part of our tradition, and that's not exclusive to us. But as the Hebrew scripture developed, for example, the more you read it, the more you realize that the real motif and the message of the Jewish people across the centuries, maybe even more so because we've been so persecuted, is to bring social justice into this world. So it was there was a natural appeal, plus a lot of folks in our community and many others as well. We talk about the rabbis who walked with King, but there were many Catholic priests, and all kinds of folks, housewives, you know, working men, you know, and working women. I should say that that's what the housewives remark.
Yes, thank you.
But it's sort of in our DNA. But I just want to say, I want to elaborate more about this evening at the panel that was led by my dear friend and colleague. The Black community doesn't get enough recognition for how it reached out, and it was also moved enough to invite the Jewish community and the black community taught us a great deal.
Okay. So again, you see that kind of rhetoric. A, it's in our DNA. B, we are just naturally drawn to the spreading of social justice. And 3, the black community invited us in. You see those 3 things that are constantly being said. I mean, Saul Alinsky, again, I invite people to go and write and watch that Canadian piece. In fact, I think it's 2 documentaries that they did in the late 60s, early 70s, where Saul Alinsky said, no, they invited me into Chicago. They invited me into where is it? In New York, upstate New York. I forget the name of the town.
Upstate New York.
Where
Yep.
Eastman Kodak was. What's the name of that town?
Man, I only know one.
I think it's
one,
Buffalo, New York, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm about to say, if it ain't Buffalo, it's Rochester. Those are the only.
Yeah, I think it was Rochester, New York. Actually, I think it was Rochester. But yeah, they invited me into the black church, and so, but the reality of it is, when you look at it, it wasn't that these Negroes went seeking out Jewish, camaraderie. It was rather the case that these individuals came and pitched themselves and said and pointed to the injustices and offered a partnership to try to do something about said injustice. And so they frame it as if they were invited in, when no, there's actually more to the story than that. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that, like, if the claim is that you do see this push within the Islamist worldview to push communism, you see the same thing with some of these secular radical ethnic Jews who, by their own admission, are saying it's part of our DNA to spread social justice. So I guess what do you say to that?
Well, that's a very, very, very heavy question, a very nuanced question. And let me just say that there's nothing at all wrong with asking that question and attempting to answer it, but attempting to answer it objectively and scholarly, because as human beings, I mean, especially if you have a critical eye for these kinds of things, you'd be a fool, or you'd be, I don't know, just a liar or whatever. You can't be that blind. You can clearly see this constant, as you mentioned. You talked about Mann, you talked about Alinsky, and so I can't help but think of such individuals as George Soros and these kinds of folks. To want to know, in order to get to the bottom of, okay, what exactly, if anything, is at play here? Does it make you a Jew hater or a bigot or an anti-Semite or anything of that sort, for simply wanting to understand the dynamic, whether within the Jewish diaspora or perhaps it's some sort of external factor that may or may not be unique to the Jewish experience? If there even is such a thing as a Jewish experience, what exactly does that mean? Because on the one hand, Jews get the label of being, right, a lot, the folks who help to spread a lot of these destructive ideas. And then on the other hand, when you look at it, say, for example, within the context of late 19th century Germany, and you look at the writings and the philosophies of someone, say, like a Sombart, a lot of these other early, fascist thinkers, a lot of these thinkers that heavily influenced the Nazi movement that was to come, the idea was, Jews were exploiting capitalists, and they were taking advantage of folks economically, and so on and so forth. And so on the one hand, they're communists, and on the other hand, there are these predatory capitalists, these predatory moneylenders, and all sorts of other things. And so, again, that kind of speaks to the question of, is there even a such thing as a quote unquote Jewish experience? That is a very interesting and a very heavy question, and I don't even know if we got the time to unpack it. But it's kind of I don't know. It goes back to something I said earlier, and it's interesting that you bring up that question, because considering the fact, and you mentioned the existence of the Jewish state, and of course, from a practical point of view, me myself, I think every state that exists now, I mean, if it is his own sovereign political entity, then yeah, there are people there. There's a whole, you wipe out an entire country. Well, what becomes of the people? That's not just the Jewish state. That's any country. I mean, it didn't. So there's that. But when you look at the fact that, of course, for centuries, Jews have had this kind of unique experience, particularly in Europe and of course, in the Middle East and in Northern Africa, etc., where they were this kind of proverbial minority. And I guess, again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier and why, certain Jews are so susceptible to these kinds of ideas. Chad, that's a very loaded question. I don't have time to unpack it, but I would just refer to, there's one book that I refer to often. It's called The Ordeal of Civility. It talks about how Jews, in their attempt to merge into and assimilate within the wider society, and the barriers and the difficulties it is for Jews to assimilate into the wider society. And many of them began to see their Judaism as a curse. And so therefore they began to focus a lot of their energy in a lot of these intellectual pursuits. This is why I always say that in many respects, and I picked up this idea from a line that was said by Fulton Sheen when you read his book, Communism in the Consciousness, and what is it called? Communism in the Consciousness of the West, or the Consciousness of the West, something like that. Fulton Sheen's book. You look it up, you'll find it. And Fulton Sheen made a remark in his book when he says that fascism and communism were secularism made flesh. So when the more and more I began to unpack this, and the more and more I began to understand it, in this, in a certain respect, in a certain sense, these totalitarian ideas was almost like the logical conclusion of the Enlightenment, to our detriment. There's another interesting book about this you can read. It doesn't particularly pertain to the Jews, but it's a book is called Why Liberalism Fails. Very interesting book. Again, it's not talking about, you've read Why Liberalism Fails. Good. So it's another good book. And in many respects,
defeated is the point that's made.
Right. And so, when to go back to this book, The Ordeal of Civility, it talks about how Karl Marx, how and why he became so influential, why Sigmund Freud, another ethnic Jew, became so influential and significant. Very, very interesting read. But and I would also point people to, you should go and read the late David Horowitz's memoir, Prodigal Son, where he talks about his father. And because a lot of these ethnic Jews who came to the United States in the early 20th century were what we refer to as red diaper babies. Why were a lot of these Jews, newly arrived Jews, first and second generation Jews, why were so many of them red diaper babies? And he talked about his father in his memoir. And he talks about how his father clung to these collectivist ideas because not only did he need an identity, but he needed to feel the sense of security because his father was a weak man. And again, it goes on. It's a very, 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 very interesting question, Chad. And I don't think it's something that we can unpack shortly, but because I could take it all the way back to the first century and the Simon Bar Kokhba rebellion, and when the Jews were vanquished from the Holy Land in the first century by Emperor Hadrian, and the difficulties that came downstream from there. I've mentioned, Chad, also that again, because there is no collective homogenous Jewish experience, because the Jewish experiences as it pertains to the Rhineland is something very, very specific in and of itself. Because one of the things that you notice is that a lot of prominent intellectuals, whether they be Jewish or otherwise, come from Central Europe, the region of what is today modern day Germany. Now, what is specific about Prussian culture, this kind of pan-Germanic culture that gave rise to this highbrow intellectual class. And again, a lot of them took to a lot of these liberal ideas. And I think, the totalitarian aspect of it was almost like the logical outgrowth of the Enlightenment to our detriment. But that's a very, very loaded question. And Chad, one more thing, and I will refer people to the work and the writings of someone who was an ethnic Jew who became an atheist and then went on to convert to, I think he became a Lutheran, or was it Eastern Orthodox? But anyway, very, very important man. And literally, his work is so, it's hard. You can't imagine how valuable his work is. It's invaluable to understanding Marxism. And that is the work of Richard Wurmbrand. Richard Wurmbrand, ethnic Jew, converted to Christianity. And he'll talk and he tells you about just the whole experience and how communism and how Judaism, a kind of Judaism that is true to the tenets of the Old Testament, are diametrically opposed to one another. And he talks about how that whole mechanism, how that whole thing got perverted. But Chad, this whole idea of a social justice and how that's in our DNA, again, I don't buy that. I don't feed into that. But again, I think there are a multitude of reasons and theories and things that I can point to. I can also point to, I've mentioned this before in the past, Chad, about the influence I believe that the Napoleonic Wars had on a lot of Jews in Russia. There's another, he's actually a left-wing scholar, of Jewish extraction, by the name of Isaiah Berlin. He talks a lot about this in his research and his writings, and talks about how many of the liberal ideas that the French had brought into Germany when Jews were under Prussian oppression and Prussian suppression. It talks about how a lot of Jews kind of looked at these French Enlightenment ideas as kind of like inspiration for their political and economic and social transcendence as they were, facing down Prussian oppression in Central Europe. And so there are a lot. That's a very, very loaded question, as you can see. But it's not what you read in the protocols of the Elders of Zion, which was a Soviet, sort of like the Willie Lynch letter. It was this Soviet concoction that came out of Russia because of course communists they hate Jews as well, and this. If you were to read Karl Marx's essay in his response to Bruno Bauer called "On the Jewish Question," you'll read exactly what Marxists think of Jews. But why Jews betray their own heritage and why they betray their own faith and betray their God in this way, it's a question that's too long. It has too long of an answer to answer adequately right now.
Kirkland read 100s. I know you probably don't care, but Nelson Mandela has some MLK characteristics. If you are interested in making international content, we've spoken on Nelson Mandela, and I know that Chuck has spoken at length on Nelson Mandela. But yes, he was a communist. He was part of that same movement, and it is international. It's not just American, and so more on that to come. And then we have one from Super Kafir 3000. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Social justice in Islam. Found it. Thanks, Chuck. So yeah, thanks for that resource, along with all the other resources that you've shared with us this evening. And then the last one we have from Albert Maximilian. It's sad that I assumed that your songs were AI generated lyrics. The songs are fire, bro, and they're testaments to your brilliance, Chad. Keep up the good work. How we can keep us posted on how we can buy your music in the future. Keep up the great work. Yeah, so there's actually a couple of artists who I'm going to be working with, who I'm excited about, to try to really go further in bringing these songs to life. There's a country singer out of Nashville. Actually, there's a couple of singers out of Nashville who I want to work with. I actually wrote some songs that I'm going to be sharing with Dayon Winston, who you guys have seen in the comment section, because I know he sings as well, and try to bring some songs to life. So thank you for that. Thank y'all for supporting.
Can I say one thing before we wrap it up? You know, just to speak on, we're talking like Islam and Judaism, and of course, you know, Karl Marx, you know, he abandoned his rabbinic tradition and actually converted to Christianity. And Marx had some very profound Christian writings early on in his life before he became an atheist. So Karl Marx was another ethnic Jew who converted to Christianity. But when you look at it, and I'll be remiss if I didn't mention this, whether it be Islam, whether it be Judaism, whether it be, you know, Christianity in the form of the, you know, social gospel or whatever the case may be. When you, for example, you look at someone like Mao Zedong said in his own words, this is a quote of Mao, that he said that he grew up in the place where he was raised, the town, village, or whatever. He said that there was a temple in short distance from his home that was dedicated to Confucius. And he said that growing up, you know, especially when he began to, I guess, like Martin began to think critically and began to question, Mao said that he used to fantasize, because I guess there was some kind of statue or something dedicated to Confucius, or a statue of Confucius. And he said that he could think of nothing more. He wanted to do more than to go and destroy that statue, because he hated God. He hated matters of the spirit. Now, whether or not, theologically speaking, right, Jews and Christians have disagreements, Muslims and Christians have all these, but when it's all said and done, no matter if you're talking about heretical Judaism in the form of, you know, the kind of socialist Zionism that Moses Hess made popular, whether you're talking about social justice in Islam or whatever the case, or Christian, you know, just the heretical social gospel, what it is they're embracing, of course, a doctrine of materialism. And so in another context, if you shift it a little bit and look at it from a different kind of polemic, sure, you can have different conceptions of spirituality and everything else, but what those on the hard left, these communist Marxian types, their religion is, of course, dialectical materialism. It is the material, all form of belief system that places a greater emphasis on the importance of the transcendent, where no matter how you conceive of it, is an enemy to the materialist doctrine. Because, right, there's nothing beyond the physical. It's all matter. It's all material. It's materialism. So it doesn't matter if you are a religious person of any kind, best believe at some point the communists are going to put their crosshairs on you. It doesn't matter what your faith is.
100%. Chuck, I thank you for your time. I'll probably be calling you or texting you tomorrow to try to figure out dates for continuing on with the conversation. So very much appreciated. If you haven't already, go to chadojackson.com. There you'll have access to, I think we're up to episode 6 now of the MLK Project. Just click on ways to watch, and we have 3 ways to watch there. In the meantime, Dee and I will be back here tomorrow to have a Q&A for those of you who have watched season 6 or episode 6 rather, and are a Patreon top tier subscriber. That Q&A is there for you. So anyway, love you all. God bless.
If foundations crumble, what would a righteous do? I remember the God enthroned in heaven still rules. Examine me, Lord, and count me among your tribe. Continue to light my way. I just wanna see your face. I trust in the Lord, so into the mountains I will not flee. I will not be struck by the weapons they fashion for me. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God is their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. I will not conform to age. For this I know we will all get our wish. But thank you, oh Lord, for the sacrifice you made. Use me to go forth and proclaim your name. The wicked ways of the evil won't last. Be with your remnant in order our path. Although things seem so dim, this hour will pass. We long for your coming, so come soon we ask. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay. And for their transgressions they'll pay. For God hates their ways, and for their transgressions they'll pay.
Like a deer who pants for water, my soul thirsts for you. When shall I appear before the Lord? My tears have been my food. Scoffers say all day and night, tell me where is your God? My heart breaks as I recall worshiping among your tribe. I'm overwhelmed, my heart is sad, but always I will hope in you. Even though I'm displaced, to me you always been true. Yeah. I hear the crashing of raging seas, the waves and tides sweep over me. Each day the Lord pours unfailing love upon me, and I sing praises through the night. I pray to God who gives me life. Oh God, my rock, don't forget me. This I cry. Why must I wander around in grief, tormented by scoffers and enemies? They tell me the Lord is not here, he's far from me. Why am I down? Why is my heart sad? I hope in my God and I will be glad. I praise him again, my Savior and God at that. Like a deer who pants for water, my soul thirsts for you.